For thousands of years, it stood unconquered, seemingly eternal. The land of the Pharaohs, of towering pyramids and endless deserts. Ancient Egypt, a civilization so enduring, we called it immortal. But what if that immortality was a facade? What if, after millennia of glory, the final collapse of ancient Egypt was not just an ending, but a slow, horrifying descent into oblivion that left an indelible scar on the world? Tonight we ask, did immortal Egypt finally collapse? And if so, what chilling truth lies within its last, agonizing breath? Tonight we're going to witness the end of the world, or at least, the end of a world. We're traveling back 3,000 years to stand on the gilded edge of a precipice, watching the slow, majestic, and sometimes baffling collapse of the greatest civilization of the ancient world, Egypt. You're standing in a grand hall, sunlight lancing through high clear-story windows, illuminating a fine haze of dust motes and incense, smoke that hangs in the air. The sheer scale of everything is designed to make you feel small, insignificant. Columns carved like bundles of papyrus reeds soar towards a ceiling painted with golden stars against a lapis lazuli sky. It's hot, a thick, syrupy heat that presses down on you, making the fine, white linen of your tunic cling to your skin. The air smells of lotus blossoms floating in ornamental pools, of roasting meat from the palace kitchens, and the slightly metallic scent of the Nile itself, the lifeblood of this entire kingdom, flowing just beyond the palace walls. From where you're standing, this empire seems eternal, unshakable. And that's the point. But it's an illusion. And given the political intrigue, the strange diseases, and the sheer number of angry gods you could accidentally offend, you probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It's a huge help. And for a bit of fun, post your city and what time it is for you right now in the comments. I love seeing where you're all listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shift your weight from one foot to the other on the polished stone floor. You're a minor functionary, perhaps a scribe or a court attendant, just important enough to be here, but not so important that anyone actually notices you, which is, you've learned, the safest way to be. Your eyes are drawn to the throne at the far end of the hall. It's a masterpiece of gold and cedar wood, and seated upon it is the living God, the Lord of the two lands, the Pharaoh. He is a blaze of color and light, his striped Neem's headdress instantly recognizable, the golden uraeus cobra poised over his brow, ready to spit fire at his enemies. He seems less like a man, and more like a statue brought to life. His movements minimal, deliberate, and laden with 3,000 years of ritual. Everything in this room, in this city, in this entire kingdom, is built around a single, powerful concept, Ma'at. It's a word that means order, truth, justice, and cosmic balance, all rolled into one. The idea is that the universe was created in a state of perfect harmony, and the primary job of the pharaoh, and by extension, every single Egyptian, is to maintain that harmony. Every harvest, every victory, every sunrise is proof that Ma'at is being upheld. Every drought, every defeat, every famine is a terrifying sign that chaos, the great serpent Apep, is winning. For millennia, this belief has been the kingdom's bedrock. It has carried Egypt through invasions, civil wars, and natural disasters. It is the ultimate source of its resilience. You look around at the other courtiers. They are the great and the good of the kingdom. High priests with shaved heads gleaming with scented oils. Generals with chests full of golden awards, their faces tanned to leather from desert campaigns. Viziers carrying the weight of the kingdom's vast bureaucracy on their shoulders. A bureaucracy so complex it would make a modern tax office weep with envy. They all wear heavy, elaborate wigs, which seems like a frankly terrible fashion choice in this heat. But who are you to question tradition? Everyone's eyes are lined with thick, black coal. It's not just for show. You know it helps to cut the glare of the relentless sun, and the priests say the lead-based minerals it contains offer magical protection from eye infections. A little bit of poison to keep you healthy. It's the Egyptian way. From your humble perspective, this civilization has already existed for an almost unimaginable length of time. The Great Pyramid at Giza, that wonder of the world, was built over 1,000 years before you were born. To you, it is more ancient than the Roman Colosseum is to us. The stories of Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure are as remote and mythic to you as the tales of King Arthur. This sense of immense, bottomless history creates a powerful and dangerous sense of permanence. The kingdom has always been here. The gods have always watched over it. The Nile has always provided. The Pharaoh has always maintained Ma'at. Therefore, it will always be so. Historians still argue whether the average Egyptian courtier, someone just like you, truly sensed the decay, or if the state-sponsored propaganda of eternity was just that convincing. Was there a quiet, gnawing anxiety beneath the gilded surface? Or was the end of your world simply unthinkable? You look back at the Pharaoh. He is receiving a report from a military commander. The man's words are too low for you to hear, but his posture is confident. Everything is fine, his stance says. The borders are secure. The trade routes are open. The gods are pleased. But you've heard whispers. You're a scribe. You see the records. The grain shipments from the northern deltas were slightly smaller this year. The tribute of gold from the mines in Nubia to the south, well, the official scroll said it was a magnificent offering. But you saw the numbers. They were lower than last year. And the year before that. There are hushed stories, too, from the port cities of the Mediterranean. Tales of entire kingdoms vanishing, of cities burned to the ground by mysterious raiders sailing in from the sea. Barbarian troubles, the official sniff. Nothing that the might of Egypt can't handle. Still, it feels like a cold draft in a warm room. An unspoken truth hangs in the air, thicker than the incense. The world beyond your borders is changing, violently and unpredictably. For now, the gold still shines, the rituals are still observed, and the power of Pharaoh seems absolute. But you can't shake the feeling that you are standing in the brilliant, warm glow of a setting sun. The Pharaoh on the throne is Ramses III. He's the last great warrior king of the new kingdom, a man desperately trying to live up to the legacy of his near-mythical namesake, Ramses the Great. And to be fair, he's doing a pretty good job of it, at least on the surface. The reports he receives aren't just about low grain yields. They are terrifying dispatches from the front lines of a crumbling world. The Hittite Empire to the north, once Egypt's great rival and then partner, has simply vanished from the map. The glittering port city of Ugarit has been burned to the ground, its clay tablets baking in the inferno, preserving for all time a final, desperate plea for help that never came. It's the late Bronze Age collapse, a mysterious and violent cascade of destruction that is wiping out civilizations across the eastern Mediterranean. And now, the storm has reached the shores of Egypt. You see the reliefs being carved on the temple walls at Medinet Habu, a project of monumental scale. It's the Pharaoh's great mortuary temple, but it's also a piece of military propaganda, an eternal billboard celebrating his prowess. The carvings show invading armies, a chaotic confederation of peoples arriving by land and sea. The Egyptians call them the Sea Peoples. They are a mystery, a hodgepodge of tribes with feathered headdresses, horned helmets, and a fierce determination. You see them depicted with their families in tow, riding on heavy ox carts. This isn't just a raiding party, it's a migration. They are a people looking for a new home, and they don't mind who they have to displace to get it. Ramses III meets them head-on. First, in a massive land battle on the edge of the delta. His artists carve the scenes with heroic clarity. The Egyptian chariots, a storm of arrows and bronze, smashing into the infantry and ox carts of the invaders. Then comes the masterstroke, the naval battle in the mouths of the Nile. Ramses, ever the strategist, lets the sea people's fleet sail into the narrow channels of the delta. It's a trap. Hidden along the banks, Egyptian archers rain death upon the enemy ships. Then, the Egyptian navy, more agile and familiar with these waters, closes in, grappling the enemy vessels and turning the sea into a slaughterhouse. The reliefs show Egyptian soldiers pulling drowning men from the water, their faces a mask of grim satisfaction. It is a stunning, total victory. Egypt is saved. Ma'at is restored. Or so the story goes. But winning a war is one thing. Paying for it is another. And this victory has cost Egypt dearly. You, as a minor cog in the vast state machine, feel it directly. The state treasury, once overflowing with gold from Nubia and tribute from vassal states in Syria-Palestine, is now dangerously depleted. Those vassal states are gone, swallowed by the chaos. The trade routes are shattered. The copper mines that are essential for making bronze weapons and tools are either exhausted or in enemy territory. The kingdom has turned inward, forced to live on its own resources, and the strain is beginning to show. The price of emmer wheat, the staple food that serves as the basis for bread, beer, and even wages, begins to creep up. Then it gallops. A sack of grain that cost 1 deben of copper now costs 2, then 4, then 8. It's an inflationary spiral that would feel unnervingly familiar today. And this is where the system really starts to crack. You work in the bureaucracy, so you get your rations, but you hear about the artisans and craftsmen who live in the village of Deir el-Medina. These are the men who build and decorate the royal tombs in the Valley of the Kings. They are elite, highly skilled state employees, and one day their monthly grain payment simply doesn't arrive. At first they wait. Then they protest to the local scribe. Then they do something unprecedented, something that shakes the very foundations of the divine order. They put down their tools and walk off the job. It is the first recorded labor strike in human history. They march towards the very temples that celebrate the king's victory, shouting, "We are hungry." It's a shocking act of defiance. For a society built on the unquestioning authority of the Pharaoh, it's a sign that the covenant is broken. If the Pharaoh cannot even provide bread for the men who build his eternal home, then is he truly upholding Ma'at? The strike is eventually settled. A panicked vizier finds some grain from a temple storehouse to placate the workers. But the damage is done. The aura of infallible, divine competence has been pierced. And the trouble doesn't stop there. In the palace itself, a far more sinister plot is brewing. The official court documents that survive, like the judicial papyrus of Turin, read like a political thriller. A secondary wife of Ramses III, a woman named Tai, decides her own son, Pentar, should be pharaoh, not the designated heir. It's a classic power grab, but the conspiracy she weaves is vast, involving high-ranking officials, military commanders, concubines, and even a royal butler. It's a testament to the deep dissatisfaction festering just beneath the surface of the court. Historians call it the harem conspiracy. The plotters use black magic, creating wax figurines of the pharaoh to curse him, alongside more practical methods. They plan to incite a rebellion on the outside, while an assassin strikes from within. The plot is discovered, and the conspirators are rounded up and put on trial. The papyrus records their fates in stark, chilling terms. Many are sentenced to death. Others, of higher rank, are permitted, or forced, to take their own lives. But what about the pharaoh himself? For centuries, it was unclear if the plot succeeded. But modern CT scans of Ramses III's mummy have revealed a deep, wide gash across his throat, hidden for millennia beneath his linen bandages. Scholars debate the exact nature of the wound that killed Ramses III, but it seems almost certain he was assassinated. The great victor, the savior of Egypt, was murdered by his own household. He won the war against the foreigners only to lose the battle for control within his own palace, brought down by economic chaos, social unrest, and a desperate hunger for power. The victory reliefs at Medinet Habu tell a story of triumph, but the truth is far darker. They are the beautiful, elaborate tombstone of a dying age. Let's linger for a moment on these invaders, these sea peoples, because they aren't just a convenient plot device to weaken Egypt. They are the central mystery of the end of the Bronze Age. You stand on the docks of a port city like Paramses, the great capital in the Delta. The air is thick with the smell of salt, fish, and foreign spices. Sailors from Crete, Cyprus, and the Levant shout to each other in a dozen different languages. For centuries, this has been the nexus of a thriving, interconnected world. It's the ancient equivalent of a globalized economy, built on ships carrying copper from Cyprus, tin from Anatolia, olive oil from Greece, and fine textiles from Syria. Now that world is on fire. The ships that come in now bring not goods, but refugees. They bring wild-eyed stories of cities vanishing overnight. They speak of a great wave of destruction moving from west to east, a wave that has already shattered the Mycenaean palaces of Greece, the legendary homes of Agamemnon and Odysseus. They say the great fortresses of the Hittites have been burned and abandoned. These aren't just isolated pirate raids, it's a systems collapse. The Sea Peoples are both a cause and a symptom of this collapse. The name itself is an Egyptian invention, a catch-all term for a coalition of different groups. The temple inscriptions at Medinet Habu name them: the Pele Set, the Jeker, the Shikalesh, the Denyen, the Weshish. It's like a roll call for the apocalypse. You try to picture them. The reliefs give you some clues. The Pele Set wear distinctive feathered or fluted headdresses, which has led many historians to identify them with the Philistines of the Bible, who later settle on the coast of Canaan. It's a mainstream historical fact that these groups had a significant impact on the geopolitical map of the Levant after their defeat by Egypt. The Jeker, some scholars suggest, may have been related to the Teucrians of Anatolia, perhaps ancestors of the Trojans. The Shikalesh might have come from Sicily, the Denyen from the Greek mainland. It's a vast, speculative puzzle based on linking the sounds of ancient names across different languages. But who were they really? This is where historians still argue. Were they a displaced army of pirates and marauders, a kind of ancient Viking horde taking advantage of the chaos? Or were they climate refugees? There is compelling evidence of widespread, prolonged drought and famine across the region at this time. The so-called earthquake storms, a proposed theory of a series of catastrophic earthquakes that rippled along the fault lines from Greece to Syria, might have added to the instability. Perhaps their fields turned to dust, their cities crumbled, and they were forced to take to the sea in a desperate search for a new place to live, a land that still had water and food. That would explain the ox carts with their women and children. It's a much more desperate and tragic picture than simple villainy. You can almost imagine the terror and the resolve of a father, pushing his family's meager belongings onto a flimsy boat, setting off into the unknown because staying home meant certain starvation. As you stand on the docks, you see the Egyptian response. The shipyards are working overtime. The sound of hammers and saws is constant. They are building warships, reinforcing the harbor defenses. There's a nervous energy in the air, a mix of grim determination and fear. You see a patrol of soldiers marching past, their bronze-tipped spears and rectangular shields gleaming. They look young, barely old enough to grow the stubble on their chins, but the stories they've heard have aged their eyes. Here's a quirky tidbit about this period of chaos. Piracy becomes a legitimate, if terrifying, career path. One of the most fascinating documents to survive from just after the reign of Ramses III is the story of Wenamun. It's the report of an Egyptian official sent to the city of Byblos in modern-day Lebanon to buy cedarwood for the sacred boat of the god Ammonius Ra. A century earlier, this would have been a routine trip. The local prince of Byblos would have bowed and scraped before the representative of the mighty pharaoh. But when Winneman arrives, he is treated with contempt. The prince tells him the days of getting free lumber are over. The glory of Egypt is gone, he sneers. Winneman is robbed by his own crew, stranded, and then pursued by pirates from the Checker tribe, the very same group defeated by Ramses III. These Checker have now set up their own little coastal city-state and are making a living by shaking down anyone who tries to sail past. The story perfectly captures the new reality. Egyptian authority has evaporated outside its own borders. The world has become a patchwork of petty warlords and pirate kings. The Egyptians fought them off. Ramses III captured thousands of these sea peoples as prisoners of war. And what did he do with them? In a move that is both pragmatic and, in hindsight, dangerously short-sighted, he settled them in military garrisons in the Egyptian-controlled territories of Canaan. He essentially made them his mercenaries, his border guards. He took the very people who tried to invade him and gave them land and weapons, asking them to defend Egypt from other people just like them. It's a classic case of hiring the wolves to guard the henhouse. For a while it worked. It plugged the gaps in Egypt's overstretched defenses, but it also introduced a powerful, alien military class into the region, a group with their own culture, their own gods, and no inherent loyalty to the pharaoh or the concept of Mai. These settlements would grow into powerful city-states, like the Philistine Pentapolis, and would be a thorn in the side of Egypt and its neighbors for centuries to come. The victory against the Sea Peoples was not an end to the story. It was the beginning of a new, complicated chapter, one where the clear lines between us and them were about to get very blurry indeed. The chaos of the harem conspiracy and the economic turmoil following the wars doesn't just fade away. It metastasizes, eating away at the very structure of the state. With the death of Ramses III, a long, slow decline accelerates. A series of short-lived pharaohs, all confusingly named Ramses, take the throne. They are the tail end of the 20th dynasty, a dynasty that started with such promise, but is now sputtering out like a cheap candle. They are pale imitations of their great ancestors, unable to command the respect or project the power that the office of pharaoh requires. The center cannot hold. You are now a priest, serving in the great temple complex of Karnak, in the city of Thebes. Thebes is the religious heart of the kingdom, the domain of the mighty god Ammonius Ra, king of the gods. For centuries, victorious pharaohs have lavished this temple with tribute, gold, land, and cattle. The temple of Ammonius has become an economic powerhouse in its own right, a state within a state. Its granaries are fuller than the king's. Its treasury is wealthier, and its leader, the high priest of Ammonius, is starting to look a lot more powerful than the pharaoh hundreds of miles away in the northern capital of Paramses. Your daily life is governed by ancient rituals. You wake before dawn to purify yourself in the sacred lake. You chant the morning hymns as the sun rises, its first rays striking the golden tips of the obelisks, making it seem as if the structures themselves are generating the light. You are part of a vast, intricate machine dedicated to pleasing the god. But you also see the other side of things. You see the scribes calculating the temple's vast income from its estates, which stretch all across upper, southern Egypt. You see the temple guards, who are better armed and better paid than the pharaoh's own soldiers in this region. The high priest of Ammonius, a man named Herihor, is your boss. He's a charismatic and ambitious figure. He's a military commander as well as a priest, holding the title Generalissimo. It's a combination of roles that should not exist. Church and state are not just intertwined. They're fusing into a single entity, and that entity is not the pharaoh. Slowly, subtly at first, Herihor begins to adopt royal titles and imagery. On the temple walls, you see him depicted in reliefs, making offerings directly to the gods, a privilege once reserved for the pharaoh alone. Then, you see something truly audacious. In a relief at the Temple of Khonsu, part of the Karnak complex, Herihor has his name written in a cartouche, the oval ring that is the exclusive symbol of a king. It's a stunning declaration of power. He's not claiming to be the pharaoh of all Egypt, not yet, but he is claiming to be the king of this southern domain. Meanwhile, in the north, the last of the Ramesside pharaohs, Ramses XI, is still officially the ruler. But he's a king in name only. His authority barely extends beyond the walls of his own capital city. He is unable to stop the rampant corruption that has taken hold. A particularly nasty symptom of this breakdown of order is the widespread tomb robbery in the Valley of the Kings. This is the ultimate sacrilege. These tombs are the eternal homes of the gods on earth, the divine pharaohs. To break into them, to desecrate the mummies and steal the sacred treasures, is a profound violation of Ma'at. It's a sign that people no longer fear divine retribution, or perhaps that their hunger is greater than their fear. A series of papyri from this period, known as the Tomb Robbery Papyri, document the trials of the culprits who were caught. They read like court transcripts, with confessions extracted under torture, which involved beating the soles of the feet, a practice known as the bastinado. The confessions reveal a network of corruption that goes right to the top of the local administration in Thebes. Mayors, scribes, and even priests were in on it, taking a cut of the stolen gold to supplement their own dwindling state salaries. It's a quirky, if grim, fact that the very officials tasked with protecting the tombs were often the ones organizing their plunder. Historians still debate the exact nature of the relationship between Herihor in Thebes and Ramses XI in the north. Was it an open rivalry, a cold war on the brink of becoming a hot one? Or was it a more complex, symbiotic decay? Some scholars suggest they reached a kind of grudging agreement, a formal division of the kingdom. The pharaoh would rule the north, the land of Lower Egypt, and the high priest would rule the south, Upper Egypt, as a de facto king. They maintained the fiction of a united country. The high priests in Thebes would even date their inscriptions and documents to the regnal year of the pharaoh in the north, a nod to his theoretical authority. But in practice, Egypt was now two separate countries. The lord of the two lands was now, at best, the lord of one land. When Ramses XI finally dies, the 20th dynasty dies with him. There is no clear successor from his line. The throne in the north is seized by a man named Smens, who had been ruling the Nile Delta as a powerful viceroy. In the south, Herihor's authority becomes absolute. The division is complete. Egypt has entered what historians call the Third Intermediate Period. The name itself sounds dreary, a historical placeholder between golden ages. And for the people living through it, it was a time of confusion and instability. Your loyalty was no longer to a single, divine king who ruled the entire length of the Nile. Your loyalty was to your local potentate, be it a priest king in Thebes or a merchant prince in the Delta. The grand, unified vision of Egypt that had lasted for 2,000 years had fractured. The kingdom built on the promise of cosmic unity was now fundamentally, and perhaps irrevocably, divided against itself. The foundation of Ma'at had cracked right down the middle. The political division of Egypt sets the stage for the next chapter, and it's a strange one. The country is not just split between north and south anymore. It begins to fragment even further. The new dynasty of pharaohs in the north, the 21st dynasty, based in the city of Tanis in the Delta, are relatively weak. They control their own corner of Egypt, but their authority is spotty elsewhere. Power has become localized. In this vacuum, a new group of leaders emerges from a place you might not expect. from within the ranks of the very people Egypt once fought. Remember those Libyan tribes from the west, the ones who had been trying to invade Egypt since the days of Ramses III? Well, many had been defeated, captured, and settled in Egypt as soldiers and farm laborers. Over the generations, these Libyan communities, particularly those of the Meshwesh tribe, have become deeply Egyptianized. They worship Egyptian gods, adopt Egyptian customs, and speak the Egyptian language. But they haven't entirely forgotten their own traditions. They maintain their tribal structures, their distinctive names, and a strong sense of their own identity. They are, in a way, the original hyphenated Egyptians, Libyan Egyptians. You are now living in a city in the Nile Delta, perhaps Bubastis. Your neighbor, a man with a name like Shoshenq or Osorkin, is a leader in the local Meshwesh community. He's a big man, a great chief of the Ma, as their tribal leaders call themselves. He owns vast estates, commands a private army of loyal kinsmen, and has more influence on the ground than the distant pharaoh in Tanis. He still reveres the pharaoh, at least in public. He pays his taxes. But everyone knows who really runs things around here. These Libyan chiefs are classic warlords, carving out their own personal fiefdoms across the delta. For a while, the Tanite pharaohs and the Meshwesh chiefs exist in a delicate balance. The pharaohs try to co-opt them, marrying their daughters to the powerful chiefs to create alliances that it's a smart political move, a way of binding these powerful men to the royal house. But all it really does is bring the warlords one step closer to the throne. It's a mainstream historical fact that this gradual accumulation of power by Libyan elites culminated when one of them, a great chief of the Ma named Shoshenq, took the throne for himself, founding the 22nd dynasty. He didn't seize it in a violent coup. The last pharaoh of the 21st dynasty died without an heir, and Shoshenq, connected by marriage and possessing overwhelming military power, simply stepped in to fill the vacuum. His reign marks a significant change in how Egypt is ruled. Shoshenq doesn't try to dismantle the old system of powerful, semi-independent chiefs. He institutionalizes it. He places his own sons and kinsmen in key positions across the country, as army commanders, as high priests in the major temples, and as chiefs in other territories. It's a system built on family loyalty rather than bureaucratic merit. It's a very Libyan, tribal way of doing things, imposed on the ancient Egyptian state. On one hand, it's a clever way to unify the country under his family's control. On the other, it sows the seeds of future chaos. What happens when the cousins and brothers start fighting amongst themselves? Shoshenq is an energetic and effective ruler. He wants to restore Egypt's prestige on the international stage. He is almost certainly the Shishak mentioned in the Old Testament of the Bible. The Bible records that during the reign of Solomon's son, Rehoboam, the king of Egypt came up and plundered the Temple of Solomon in Jerusalem, carrying away its legendary treasures. At the Temple of Karnak in Thebes, there is a massive relief, the Bubastite portal, that commemorates this very campaign. It lists dozens of cities in Judah and Israel that Shoshenq conquered or from which he extracted tribute. So he wasn't just a local warlord. He was a pharaoh in the old style, leading his armies out to project Egyptian power abroad. But here's a quirky detail about life under these Libyan pharaohs. While they adopted all the trappings of Egyptian kingship, the crowns, the titles, the tomb burials, they held onto some of their own customs. One of the most distinctive markers of Libyan identity was the use of tattoos, and, perhaps more visibly, the wearing of a specific style of cloak and a single feather in their hair. It's a small thing, but it's a visual reminder that the men on the throne were from a different background. Historians still argue about how much this foreignness mattered to the average Egyptian. Did they see Shoshenq as an outsider, a Libyan king? Or, after generations of assimilation, was he just the king? The evidence suggests that for the most part, life went on. The gods were still worshipped, the Nile still flooded, and as long as the grain rations arrived on time, the ethnicity of the man on the distant throne was probably not a daily concern for most people. However, the system Shoshenq established, ruling through a network of powerful family members, was inherently unstable. As soon as a strong king died, the rivalries began. Different branches of the family tree started to assert their own authority. Soon, you have multiple pharaohs ruling at the same time, each controlling a different part of the delta. At one point, there were at least 4 individuals simultaneously claiming the title of pharaoh, ruling from cities like Tanis, Bubastis, Leontopolis, and Sais. Egypt has shattered into a mosaic of petty kingdoms. The grand unity that Shoshenq had briefly restored was gone. The country was once again dangerously divided, weak, and ripe for intervention. And this time, the intervention would not come from the west, but from a new, powerful kingdom that had been quietly growing to the south, a kingdom that saw itself not as a foreign conqueror, but as the true heir of Egypt's glorious past. The north of Egypt splintered into a squabbling collection of Libyan-led city-states. A very different kind of power was consolidating far to the south, beyond the traditional borders of the kingdom. You are now in Nubia, the land the Egyptians sometimes called Kush. This is a region with a long and complicated relationship with Egypt. For centuries, it was an Egyptian colony, ruthlessly exploited for its gold, exotic goods, and manpower. The great pharaohs of the new kingdom, like Thutmose III and Ramses the Great, had built enormous temples here, stamped their authority on the landscape, and imposed Egyptian culture on the local population. They had, in effect, tried to turn the Nubian elites into Egyptians, and they succeeded, perhaps a little too well. You are standing in the city of Napata, near the holy mountain of Jebel Barkal. The Egyptians themselves had identified this flat-topped mountain as the southern home of their state god, Ammonius Ra. It was considered a place of immense spiritual power, a primal source of creation. Now, long after direct Egyptian rule has vanished, a native Kushite kingdom has risen, centered on this very holy site. The kings of Kush have adopted the old colonial culture as their own. They worship Ammonius Ra with a fervor that would put the divided priests in Thebes to shame. They build pyramids for their tombs, not the giant, smooth-sided pyramids of Giza, but smaller, steeper, more stylized pyramids, a design inspired by the private tombs of the Egyptian New Kingdom. They write their names in cartouches. They call themselves pharaohs. This is the fascinating paradox of the Kushite kingdom. They are a profoundly African civilization, with their own language, which we still can't fully decipher, their own cultural traditions, and their own distinct physical appearance, often depicted with darker skin and different facial features in their art. Yet, their ruling class is steeped in Egyptian religion and royal ideology. They see themselves not as imitators of Egypt, but as its purest adherents. They look north at the squabbling Libyan chiefs, who they see as illegitimate, foreign rulers who have allowed the sacred traditions to decay. They watch as temples fall into disrepair and rituals are neglected. In their eyes, Egypt, their mother culture, has fallen into the hands of barbarians. Ma'at has been abandoned, and they believe it is their sacred duty, given to them by the god Ammonius himself, to invade Egypt and restore it to its former glory. The Kushite kings of this period, the 25th dynasty, are remarkable figures. Men like Kashta, whose name means the Kushite, began the process, moving north and asserting his influence over Thebes. The priests of Ammonius in Thebes, who had long-standing connections to the cult of Ammonius in Napata, likely welcomed him. They probably saw this pious, powerful southern king as a preferable alternative to the fractious Libyan dynasts in the delta. It was a peaceful takeover of the south, but it was his son, Pi, sometimes called Pianki, who would take the decisive step. You are a soldier in Pi's army as it prepares to march north. Your comrades are a mix of Kushite warriors and Egyptian troops from the newly controlled Theban region. There's a palpable sense of religious zeal. This isn't just a war of conquest, it's a holy crusade. Pi is not just seeking power, he is on a mission from his god. Before setting out, he commands his soldiers to purify themselves in the river, to put on their finest linen, and to ritually abstain from boasting. He tells them they are the instruments of Ammonius. They are not to fight for greed or glory, but to cleanse the sacred land of the usurpers. A quirky and very humanizing detail about Pi comes from the massive granite stela, or inscribed stone slab, that he erected in the temple at Jebel Barkal to commemorate his campaign. It's a masterpiece of historical narrative, telling the story of his conquest in vivid detail. In the middle of describing sieges and battles, Pi takes a moment to express his outrage when he discovers that one of the defeated Delta kings, Nemlet of Hermopolis, has been mistreating his horses. Pi, an avid lover of horses, is more upset by this than by the rebellion itself. He goes to Nemlet's stables personally to inspect the animals, and the stela records his furious words. "I swear, as Zara loves me, it is more painful to my heart that my horses have been starved than any other evil you have done." It's a wonderful insight into the man's personality, a little touch of humanity amidst the epic tale of war and divine will. The historical debate around the 25th dynasty often revolves around perception. Were they foreign conquerors or native restorers? The Romans, writing much later, would classify them as part of an Ethiopian dynasty, lumping all sub-Saharan Africans together. But that's not how they saw themselves. Pi and his successors saw themselves as legitimate pharaohs, more Egyptian than the Egyptians they were conquering. They were not trying to impose Kushite culture on Egypt. They were trying to reimpose traditional Egyptian culture. They championed a revival of old artistic styles, copying the art and architecture of the Old and Middle Kingdoms, 1,000 years in their past. They saw this as a return to a golden age of purity. This movement is sometimes called an archaistic revival. You see it in the statues they commissioned, which have a formal, powerful quality that mimics the classical era. You see it in the renewed interest in ancient religious texts. This is a mainstream historical fact. The 25th dynasty consciously and deliberately looked to the distant past for their model of kingship and culture. They were conservatives, traditionalists, fundamentalists even, who believed they were rescuing a fallen civilization. As Pi's army marches north, the Delta kings band together under a powerful leader named Tefnakt of Sais to resist him. But they are no match for the disciplined, divinely inspired Kushite forces. Pi besieges and conquers city after city, culminating in the capture of the ancient capital of Memphis. The stela describes how he didn't just storm the city. He showed his piety by first visiting the temples and honoring the gods. After his victory, the defeated Libyan kings come before him, bowing low, their noses to the ground. But Pi refuses to let them enter his presence because they are uncircumcised, and, more importantly, they are fish-eaters, a practice he considers an abomination, unclean for those entering the royal court. It's another one of those fascinating cultural details that reveals the gulf between his pious, traditionalist worldview and that of the more cosmopolitan Delta rulers. He has conquered Egypt, but he will not break bread with its profane leaders. He has come not to join their world, but to cleanse it. The campaign of Pi is more than just a military conquest. It's a meticulously planned act of political and religious theater. He doesn't just want to rule Egypt. He wants to demonstrate, beyond any doubt, that he is the only one worthy of ruling it. You are a scribe in his entourage, tasked with documenting the events for the great victory stela that will later stand at Jebel Barkal. Your job is to capture not just the facts of the victories, but their divine significance. Every action Pi takes is calculated for its symbolic weight. After his army is mustered and purified, the first major objective is Thebes. But this is no conquest. As Pi's fleet of ships sails north down the Nile, he is greeted in Thebes as a liberator. Remember, the priests of Ammonius here have long-standing ties to his home cult in Nepeta. They see him as the champion of their god. Pi participates in the Grand Opet Festival, one of the most important religious ceremonies in Thebes, where the statue of Ammonius travels from Karnak to Luxor Temple. By taking the leading role in this festival, a role traditionally reserved for the pharaoh, he legitimizes his rule in the eyes of the people of southern Egypt without firing a single arrow. He is showing, not just telling, that he has the god's approval. From Thebes, the army continues north. The stela you're helping to compose lists the cities that fall, one by one. Heracleopolis, a key strategic city, surrenders immediately. Its ruler, Pefjawaibast, welcomes Pi, offering him tribute of gold, silver, and his finest horses. Pi is effectively collecting kings, adding them to his retinue of loyal vassals as he moves toward the heart of the resistance in the Delta. The real challenge comes at the city of Hermopolis, ruled by that horse-neglecting king, Nemlet. Nemlet had initially sworn allegiance to Pi, but then switched sides to join the Delta coalition under Tefnact. For Pi, this is not just rebellion, it's blasphemous treachery. The siege of Hermopolis is long and brutal. The stela vividly describes the Kushite siege tactics. They build a great ramp up against the city walls, erect wooden siege towers, and catapult projectiles into the city, creating misery and chaos within. The stench of death hangs over the city for days. It's a clear message to any other would-be rebels. Loyalty will be rewarded, but betrayal will be met with overwhelming force. Finally, Nemlet surrenders. His wife and daughters come to Pi's camp to plead for their lives, a classic gesture of submission in ancient warfare. It's here that the famous horse incident occurs. After scolding Nemlet for their condition, Pi accepts the city's surrender and confiscates its treasury and, of course, its stables. This entire episode is meticulously recorded that it's a mainstream historical fact that this stela provides one of the most detailed accounts of ancient warfare and diplomacy ever discovered from this period. It's a masterpiece of royal propaganda, framing Pi as both a merciless warrior and a just, pious ruler. As Pi's forces push deeper into the Delta, the coalition led by Tefnact crumbles. The final, great prize is Memphis, the ancient capital of Egypt, a city of immense symbolic importance. To be the true pharaoh, you had to control Memphis. The city is heavily fortified, its walls raised high, and it is garrisoned with Tefnact's best troops. A direct assault would be costly. Here, Pi shows his strategic brilliance. The stela recounts the council of war. His commanders advise a long siege, or a series of complex assaults. Pi dismisses their plans. He has a simpler, more audacious idea. He notices that the city's harbor, on the banks of the Nile, is fortified, but the high water level of the river has brought the ships moored there right up against the city walls and houses. In a daring amphibious assault, Pi loads his best troops onto ships, sails them directly across the harbor, and uses the ship's masts as ladders to scale the walls and get into the city. It's a complete surprise. The defenders are overwhelmed, and the city falls in a bloody battle. The capture of Memphis is the death blow to the rebellion. Following the victory, Pi makes a point of visiting the great temple of the god Ptah, making sacrifices and honoring the local gods, again demonstrating his piety and his right to rule as a traditional Egyptian pharaoh. One quirky, yet telling, detail from the aftermath is how the defeated kings are treated. After Memphis falls, the remaining Delta kinglets scramble to surrender. One by one, they come to pay homage. But Pi, in a display of religious purity, refuses to allow most of them into his presence because they are fish-eaters. Historians still debate the precise meaning of this prohibition. Was it a genuine religious taboo from his Kushite background? Was it a well-known Egyptian priestly custom that the Delta rulers had ignored? Or was it simply a calculated political snub, a way to publicly humiliate his defeated rivals and portray them as ritually impure and therefore unfit to rule? Whatever the reason, it was a powerful statement. Only one king, Nemlut of Hermopolis, the horse abuser, ironically, is eventually allowed in, presumably after undergoing some purification ritual. With his victory complete, Pi has achieved his goal. He has united the two lands under his rule, from the plains of Nubia to the shores of the Mediterranean. He is the undisputed pharaoh of the 25th dynasty. But he does something strange. He doesn't stay in Egypt to rule from Memphis or Thebes. After receiving the submission of the remaining Delta kings, including his main rival Tefnakt, he loads his ships with the spoils of war and sails back home to his capital, Napata, in Kush. He never sets foot in Lower Egypt again. He seems content to rule from a distance, leaving the defeated Delta kings in place as his vassals, provided they pay their tribute and obey his will. It's an odd end to a spectacular campaign. He fought a holy war to cleanse and unite Egypt, and then, having achieved it, he simply went home. This decision would have major consequences, as it left the fractious politics of the Delta to simmer, and created a power vacuum that would soon attract the attention of a far more dangerous and brutal empire rising in the east. The Assyrians, the pious successors, did not share his love of long-distance relationships. His brother, Shabaka, came north and consolidated Kushite rule, reigning as a proper pharaoh from within Egypt itself. For a few decades, the 25th dynasty provides a semblance of unity and strength. They are the undisputed masters of the Nile Valley, from deep in Nubia all the way to the sea. They have restored traditions, revitalized religious life, and brought a sense of order back to the fractured kingdom. But while they were busy looking inward, reuniting Egypt and celebrating its past, a new superpower had been rising in Mesopotamia. This is the Neo-Assyrian Empire, and they are unlike any enemy Egypt has ever faced. You are a merchant in the Delta city of Sais. For years, you've heard stories brought by traders and refugees from the east. They speak of the Assyrian army with a special kind of terror. They are not like the Sea Peoples, a chaotic horde migrating out of desperation. The Assyrians are a professional, disciplined, and ruthlessly efficient war machine. They are the inventors of psychological warfare. Their kings boast in their official inscriptions of the atrocities they commit, flaying enemy leaders alive, creating pyramids of severed heads, deporting entire populations. This isn't just mindless cruelty, it's state policy, designed to terrify other kingdoms into submission. They want you to know that resistance is not just futile, it's agonizing. This terrifying force has been steadily expanding westward, swallowing up the small kingdoms of the Levant, the very places Shoshenq I had campaigned in. The kingdom of Israel has been annihilated, its people scattered in the infamous 10 lost tribes. The kingdom of Judah is now a terrified vassal state, paying massive tribute to the Assyrian king. Egypt, under the Kushite pharaohs, has been playing a dangerous game, encouraging and sometimes supporting these small states to rebel against Assyria. From the Assyrian perspective, Egypt is a troublemaker, the last major power in the region standing in the way of their total domination. The clash is inevitable. The first major confrontation comes during the reign of Shabaka's successor, Taharka. He is one of the most important pharaohs of the 25th dynasty, a great builder who erected monuments throughout Egypt and Nubia. He sees himself as the rightful heir of the new kingdom pharaohs, ready to challenge the new Mesopotamian empire. The Assyrian king Esarhaddon decides that the only way to secure his western front is to neutralize Egypt once and for all. In 671 BCE, he marches his army across the Sinai Desert, a formidable logistical feat, and invades Egypt. The battle for Egypt is brutal. The Assyrian army has a technological edge, iron weapons. While the Egyptians have been using bronze for millennia, iron is harder, holds a sharper edge, and is more readily available to the Assyrians, whose empire controls the major sources of iron ore and the secrets of its smithing. Historians still debate the decisiveness of the iron versus bronze advantage, as high-quality bronze is still a formidable material. But the Assyrians also have superior siegecraft, honed over centuries of conquering walled cities, and a massive, well-organized army. Taharka's forces are defeated. The Assyrians drive south and capture the great city of Memphis. Esarhaddon's victory stela shows a truly humiliating scene. Taharka's young son, Ashenkaru, is depicted in chains, kneeling before the triumphant Assyrian king. Taharka himself escapes, fleeing south to the safety of Thebes, but the north of Egypt is now under Assyrian control. Esarhaddon, however, doesn't have the manpower to occupy the entire country directly, so he adopts a classic imperial strategy: divide and rule. He makes a deal with the local rulers in the Delta, the very same petty kings who had been defeated by Pi. He confirms them in their little city-states, including a particularly ambitious ruler named Necho I of Sais, on the condition that they serve as his loyal puppets. But Taharka is resilient. As soon as the main Assyrian army leaves, he sweeps back north from Thebes and recaptures Memphis, killing the Assyrian garrisons and reasserting his authority. This, of course, provokes a furious response. The new Assyrian king, the formidable and notoriously cruel Ashurbanipal, marches back into Egypt to punish the rebellion. This time, he is determined to break the back of Kushite power for good. Taharka is defeated again and forced to flee south, this time all the way back to his ancestral homeland of Nubia, where he eventually dies. His successor, a king named Tanatamani, makes one last, desperate attempt to reclaim the family legacy. In a dream, he sees two serpents, one on his right and one on his left, which he interprets as a divine sign that he is destined to rule both Upper and Lower Egypt. Inspired, he marches north from Napata, retakes Thebes, and then Memphis, just as his ancestors had done. But he is living in a different world. Ashurbanipal's reaction is swift and merciless. He sends his army south with a vengeance. Tanatamani is driven back into Nubia, and the Assyrians march all the way to the southern capital of Thebes, the sacred city of Ammonius Ra. What happens next is an event that sends shockwaves across the ancient world. In 663 BCE, the Assyrians sack Thebes. For the first time in its more than 1,000-year history, the holy city is plundered by a foreign army. The Assyrians stripped the temples of Karnak and Luxor of their treasures, accumulated over centuries. They carry away gold, silver, precious stones, and even 2 large obelisks, a feat of engineering in itself. This is a mainstream historical fact, recorded not just by the Assyrians, but also mentioned in the Bible, in the book of Nahum, which prophesies the fall of the Assyrian capital Nineveh and taunts it, asking if it is any better than Noamon, Thebes, which was carried away into exile. The sacking of Thebes is more than just a material loss. It's a devastating psychological blow. The sacred city, the home of the king of the gods, has been violated. For the Egyptians, it's a profound shattering of the cosmic order, a victory for chaos on an unimaginable scale. For the Kushite pharaohs, it is the end of their Egyptian dream. They retreat permanently to their southern kingdom, where they will continue to rule for another 1,000 years, but they never again control Egypt. The Black Pharaohs had come as saviors, but their intervention had ultimately brought the wolf to the door and led to the greatest sacrilege in Egyptian history. The path was now clear for a new power, a native Egyptian one, to rise from the ashes. The Assyrian domination of Egypt was brutal, but it was also brief and overstretched. The kings in far-off Nineveh had bigger problems to deal with closer to home, like rebellions in Babylonia and wars with the Elamites. They ruled Egypt with a light touch, through the proxy rulers they had installed in the Delta. This was the opportunity one of those rulers had been waiting for. His name was Psamtik-I, or Psammetichus, the son of that Necho of Sais whom the Assyrians had favored. Psamtik was a shrewd and patient political operator. He played the long game, consolidating his power base in his home city of Sais, while still paying lip service to his Assyrian overlords. You are a Greek mercenary. You've come to Egypt because you've heard there's good money to be made. The pharaoh, or rather, the guy in Sais who calls himself Pharaoh, is hiring soldiers. He's offering good pay in silver coin and plots of land to settle on. You and your comrades, with your distinctive bronze hoplite armor, round shields, and long spears, are a formidable fighting force. Psamtik astutely recognizes that he cannot rely on the loyalties of the various Egyptian and Libyan factions. So he hires foreigners who are loyal only to him and the silver he pays them. He brings in Greeks from Ionia and Carians from Anatolia, creating a new, modern, professional army. As the Assyrian Empire begins to creak under its own weight, distracted by internal conflicts, Psamtik makes his move. With his new mercenary army, he systematically extends his control over the Delta, either defeating the other local kinglets in battle or intimidating them into submission. He then marches south, unifying the entire country under his rule. It's a slow, methodical process that takes nearly a decade. He is careful not to provoke the Assyrians directly until he is sure they are too weak to retaliate. His timing is perfect. By the time he has full control of Egypt, the Assyrian Empire is in its death throes, about to be wiped off the map by a coalition of Babylonians and Medes. Psamtik-I becomes the founder of the 26th dynasty, often called the Said dynasty after their home city of Sais. This period marks the last great flowering of native Egyptian independence, a final golden age before the long twilight of foreign domination. It's an era of renewed prosperity and national pride. With the Assyrians gone, Psamtik and his successors re-established the traditional trade routes. The port cities of the Delta, like Naucratis, a city specifically set aside as a trading post for the Greeks, thrive. You see ships loaded with Egyptian grain and fine linen sailing out, and ships returning with Greek olive oil, wine, and most importantly, silver. For the first time, a true monetary economy begins to take hold in Egypt, supplementing the age-old barter system based on grain. Culturally, the Said period is fascinating. Just like the Kushite pharaohs they replaced, the Said kings were obsessed with the past. This is the height of the archaistic revival. You see artists and scribes deliberately reaching back thousands of years for inspiration. They don't look to the flamboyant new kingdom of Ramses for their models, but to the austere, classic elegance of the Old Kingdom, the age of the pyramid builders, and the Middle Kingdom. It's as if they are trying to leapfrog over the messy, chaotic centuries of division and foreign relido connect directly with the pure, powerful, ethnically correct past. A mainstream historical fact of this era is the stunning quality of the art, particularly in statuary and relief carving. The sculptors display a technical mastery that is almost unparalleled, creating works of incredible subtlety and realism, but all within the strict, formal conventions of ancient art. A famous example is the Kushite head, a beautiful, lifelike portrait of a priest from this period, which for a long time was thought to be from the much earlier Middle Kingdom because its style was so perfectly replicated. Here's a quirky tidbit from the era, related by the Greek historian Herodotus, who visited Egypt a couple of centuries later but recorded many stories from this time. He tells a tale about Psamtik-I's peculiar interest in history. To find out which was the oldest civilization on Earth, the Egyptians or the Phrygians, Psamtik allegedly conducted the first recorded psychological experiment. He took 2 newborn infants and gave them to a shepherd to raise. with strict instructions that no one should ever speak a word in their presence. Santic's theory was that, left to their own devices, the children would eventually speak the world's original, natural language. After 2 years, the shepherd reported that the first word the children uttered was Bekos. When Santic's advisors investigated, they discovered that Bekos was the Phrygian word for bread. Thus, Santic grudgingly concluded that the Phrygians were an older race than the Egyptians. It's almost certainly a fanciful story, but it perfectly captures the spirit of the age. A deep curiosity about the past and a desire to establish Egypt's place in the world. Historians still debate the true nature of this Sate revival. Was it a genuine, popular resurgence of national feeling? Or was it a top-down, state-sponsored program of antiquarianism, a political ideology designed by the kings to legitimize their rule by wrapping themselves in the sacred mantle of the past? The truth is likely somewhere in between. The long rule of the Kushites, followed by the shock of the Assyrian invasion, had created a powerful desire to restore not just political independence, but cultural and ethnic purity. By reviving the pure styles of the Pyramid Age, the Sate pharaohs were making a powerful statement. Egypt was for the Egyptians again. This golden age lasts for over a century. Pharaohs like Necho II, a different Necho from the Assyrian puppet, even try to restore Egypt's old empire in Asia, briefly campaigning in the Levant. He is also credited by Herodotus with commissioning a Phoenician expedition to circumnavigate Africa, a journey that, if it truly happened, was an incredible feat of exploration. But this renewed strength was taking place in a world where the geopolitical stakes were getting higher. To the east, the Neo-Babylonian Empire had risen from Assyria's ashes, and even further east, a new, even larger empire was coalescing. An empire that would soon dwarf all that had come before it. The Persian Empire. The brilliant final flare of native Egyptian independence was burning brightly, but a great shadow was beginning to stretch across the horizon. The final native pharaohs of the 26th dynasty must have watched the rise of Persia with a growing sense of dread. First, the brilliant and terrifying Cyrus the Great unified the Medes and the Persians. Then he conquered the fabulously wealthy kingdom of Lydia in Anatolia. Then he took the ultimate prize, the mighty city of Babylon itself. In just a few decades, Cyrus had forged the largest empire the world had ever seen, stretching from modern-day Turkey to the borders of India. Only one great ancient kingdom remained independent, Egypt. And Cyrus's son, Cambyses II, had his eyes set firmly on the prize. You are a palace official serving the pharaoh Amasis, a long-reigning and successful ruler. There's an air of anxious preparation. The mercenary garrisons are reinforced. The fortresses on the eastern frontier are strengthened. Diplomats are sent scurrying to Greek city-states, trying to forge alliances. Amasis is a canny operator, but he knows he's facing an existential threat. The Persian war machine is a new kind of beast. It's not just about numbers, it's about organization. The Persians have a genius for logistics, for command and control, and for incorporating the armies of their conquered subjects into their own. Their army is a multi-ethnic juggernaut of Medes, Babylonians, Lydians, and Greeks, all marching under a single command. Then, at the worst possible moment, Amasis dies. His son, Psamtik III, inherits the throne and the impending invasion. He is young, inexperienced, and has had no time to establish his authority. In 525 BCE, Cambyses II arrives. The decisive battle takes place at Pelusium, a heavily fortified city on the eastern edge of the Nile Delta. The battle itself is a showcase of Persian power and, according to later Greek writers, psychological trickery. The Greek historian Polyaenus, writing centuries later, tells a famous, though likely apocryphal, story about Cambyses' strategy at Pelusium. This is one of history's truly quirky military tidbits. Knowing that the Egyptians held certain animals to be sacred, particularly cats, which were associated with the goddess Batet. Cambyses supposedly ordered his frontline soldiers to carry live cats, dogs, ibises, and other revered creatures into battle. He may have even had their images painted on his soldiers' shields. The Egyptian archers and soldiers, so the story goes, were terrified of harming the sacred animals, and thus hesitated to fire their arrows or swing their swords, fearing divine punishment more than the Persian advance. The Persian army, unburdened by such scruples, smashed through the disordered Egyptian lines. It's probably a tall tale, invented later to explain how the mighty Egypt could have fallen so easily, but it speaks to a perception that the Egyptians' deep piety had become a strategic weakness. The historical reality of the battle was likely more straightforward. The Persian army was simply larger, more experienced, and better led. The Egyptian forces, despite their brave Greek mercenaries, were routed. After the defeat at Pelusium, the path to Memphis was open. Psamtik III fell back to the ancient capital, but the city was besieged and quickly captured. The young pharaoh was taken prisoner. The independent kingdom of Egypt, a civilization that had endured for nearly 3 millennia, was now a satrapy, a province, of the Achaemenid Persian Empire. Cambyses' time in Egypt is portrayed in wildly different ways, depending on who you read. The Greek historian Herodotus, who is our main source, paints him as a violent, sacrilegious madman. Herodotus claims that after his victory, Cambyses mocked Egyptian religion, stabbed the sacred Apis bull, a bull worshipped as a manifestation of the god Ptah, and plundered temples. He describes Cambyses as descending into a paranoid rage, executing his own relatives and committing acts of wanton cruelty. But this is where we must be careful. Herodotus got much of his information from Egyptian priests and officials who had a vested interest in portraying the Persian conqueror in the worst possible light. It was anti-Persian propaganda. The official Persian and even some Egyptian sources paint a different picture. A mainstream historical fact is that on a statue of an Egyptian official named Jehorsnet, the official claims that Cambyses came to Egypt, officially took on the traditional titles of a pharaoh, and paid homage to the Egyptian gods in their temples and sayas, just as any legitimate pharaoh would. This suggests Cambyses was not a madman, but a pragmatic conqueror, following the standard Persian policy of respecting local customs and religions to ensure a smooth takeover. The scholarly debate over Cambyses' character and actions in Egypt continues to this day. Was he the monster Herodotus describes, a man who broke with his father's policy of tolerance? Or was he a shrewd ruler whose reputation was systematically blackened by his enemies? The truth might be a bit of both. He may have been ruthless in putting down any resistance, which could have included harsh actions against certain temples or priestly groups that opposed him, while also performing the public rituals necessary to legitimize his rule. One of the most enduring mysteries from Cambyses' time in Egypt is the legend of his lost army. According to Herodotus, Cambyses dispatched an army of 50,000 soldiers from Thebes to march across the western desert to attack the oracle of Ammonius at the Siwa oasis. The army set out, reached one of the oases, and then marched out into the desert towards Siwa, and was never seen again. Herodotus says they were swallowed up by a massive sandstorm, buried alive under mountains of sand. For centuries, this story has fascinated adventurers and archaeologists. Was it true? Did a whole Persian army simply vanish? No definitive archaeological evidence of this lost army has ever been found. Many historians are skeptical, suggesting the story is another fabrication designed to show Cambyses as a foolish king who arrogantly challenged the gods and was punished for it. Others believe it's possible, a tragic military disaster lost to the sands of time. The lost army of Cambyses remains one of Egypt's most tantalizing unsolved mysteries. For you, as an Egyptian living through this, the conquest is a profound shock. The world has been turned upside down. For the first time, Your supreme ruler is not a living god dwelling on the Nile, but a distant great king, living in a palace thousands of miles away in Susa or Persepolis. A Persian satrap, or governor, is now installed in Memphis to rule over you. The long, unbroken line of pharaonic sovereignty has been decisively snapped. Egypt, the eternal kingdom, has become just another part of someone else's empire. Life under the great king of Persia is different. It's a strange mix of continuity and disruption. You are a landowner, perhaps with a medium-sized estate a few miles south of Memphis. On one hand, much of your daily life remains the same. You still oversee the planting of wheat and barley. Your calendar is still dictated by the Nile's inundation, and you still make offerings at the local temple to Horus and Isis. The vast, ancient machinery of Egyptian agricultural and religious life grinds on, as it always has. The Persians are generally smart enough not to interfere with the basics. They know a happy, productive farmer is a tax-paying farmer. And the taxes. The Persian Empire was, above all, an administrative marvel. They were masters of organization, and their primary goal was to extract wealth efficiently from their vast territories. The new Persian satrap in Memphis has brought with him an army of scribes and officials who are now working alongside the existing Egyptian bureaucracy. They conduct a thorough census of land, livestock, and people. Your estate, which for generations paid its dues in grain to the Pharaoh's storehouses, is now assessed for tribute to be paid in silver and grain, destined for the imperial coffers in Persepolis. The Persians also bring their own infrastructure projects. They are famous for their royal road, which stretched across the empire, and they work to maintain and improve the canal that linked the Nile to the Red Sea, a project started by the Pharaohs. This is a huge boon for trade. For the first time, goods can travel with relative ease from the Mediterranean, down the Nile, through the canal to the Red Sea, and then on to Persia and India. This brings new wealth and new products into Egypt, but the profits are mostly funneled upwards, to the Persian elite and the imperial court. You also notice new people. You see Persian soldiers in their distinctive colorful trousers and soft caps, a strange sight for Egyptians used to linen kilts. You meet Babylonian merchants and Jewish officials. The Achaemenid Empire was famously multicultural, and they had a policy of moving skilled administrators and populations around the empire to where they were needed. Aramaic, the administrative language of the Persian Empire, becomes the new language of international diplomacy and high-level business. You, as an educated landowner, probably have to learn some Aramaic to deal with the new government. This is a mainstream historical fact, evidenced by the troves of Aramaic papyri found at Elephantine, an island in the Nile at the southern border of Egypt. These documents provide a vivid picture of life in a multicultural military garrison, including a community of Jewish mercenaries who had their own temple there, much to the chagrin of the local Egyptian priests of the ram-headed god Khnum. This brings us to the simmering tension. While the Persians were often tolerant, friction was inevitable. The local Egyptian priests, who for millennia had been powerful landowners and political players, now find their authority diminished. They resent the Persian officials and the foreign garrisons, and they really resent the fact that the Persian king, despite adopting pharaonic titles, rarely visits. To the priests, he is an absentee landlord, not a divine pharaoh who actively participates in the country's religious life. This resentment occasionally boils over into open rebellion. Throughout the nearly 2 centuries of the First Persian period, Egypt is a rebellious and difficult province. There are several major revolts, often led by ambitious figures from the old Delta dynasties, and often supported with money and soldiers from Persia's great rival, Athens. You live through one of these uprisings. It starts in the western Delta, a spark of defiance that quickly spreads. For a few years, it seems to succeed. A rebel pharaoh takes control, and for a brief, glorious moment, Egypt is independent again. There's a surge of nationalistic pride. But you know the Persians will be back. And they always come back, with a bigger army and a harsher attitude. The rebellions are always eventually crushed, followed by crackdowns, executions, and even heavier taxes to pay for the cost of the reconquest. A quirky detail about this era is the introduction of new legal concepts. The Persian king Darius the Great, who came to the throne after Cambyses, was a great lawgiver. He made a point of ordering the codification of the local laws of the lands he ruled. In Egypt, he commissioned a summary of all Egyptian laws dating back to the last great native dynasty. Historians still debate the extent of this legal work, but the law of Darius seems to have been a genuine attempt to create a stable, predictable legal framework for the province. So, while you might chafe under Persian rule, if your neighbor tried to steal your land, you could theoretically appeal to a system of justice backed by the authority of the great king himself. It was a trade-off. You lost your freedom, but you gained a certain kind of imperial order. The experience of Persian rule leaves a deep scar on the Egyptian psyche. It solidifies a sense of us versus them. Before, the enemies had been Libyans or Cushites or Assyrians, but they were all part of the same general world. The Libyans and Cushites had even assimilated and become pharaohs. The Persians were different. Their culture was more alien, their empire vaster, their rule more systematic. They were the first truly global superpower to swallow Egypt whole. This long period of occupation creates a deep-seated desire for a liberator. The Egyptians don't just want a new Egyptian pharaoh. They want someone, anyone, who can kick the Persians out. They are scanning the horizon, waiting for a savior. And in the mid-4th century BCE, that savior appears, a charismatic, brilliant young king from a backwater kingdom in northern Greece called Macedonia. The news arrives like a bolt of lightning, spreading down the Nile from the ports of the Delta. The Persian Empire, that seemingly invincible behemoth, is being torn apart. A young king from Macedonia, barely in his 20s, has crossed into Asia Minor with a small but formidable army. His name is Alexander. First, he defeated the local Persian satraps at the Battle of the Granicus. Then, in a stunning, decisive battle at Issus, he met the great King Darius III himself and sent him fleeing in panic, capturing the royal family in the process. Now, instead of pursuing Darius into the heart of Persia, Alexander has turned south, marching his army down the Levantine coast, systematically taking the port cities. His destination is clear, Egypt. You are a priest in the Temple of Ptah in Memphis. There is no sense of fear or dread this time. There is a palpable feeling of anticipation, of hope. The Persians are a known quantity. Their rule has been long and, at times, oppressive. This Alexander is something new. He has shown respect to the local gods in the Greek cities of Asia Minor. More importantly, he is the enemy of your enemy. The Persian satrap in Egypt, a man named Mazax, is in an impossible position. His king, Darius III, is in disarray far to the east. The main Persian field army has been shattered. The elite Persian fleet has been neutralized by Alexander's conquest of its naval bases. Mazax has a local garrison, but he knows it's no match for Alexander's veteran Macedonian phalanxes. When Alexander crosses the desert from Gaza and arrives at the frontier fortress of Pelusium in 332 BCE, he is not met with an army. He is met with a delegation. Mazax surrenders the entire country without a fight. The Persian occupation of Egypt ends not with a bang, but with a whimper. Alexander marches to Memphis in triumph, hailed by the Egyptian people not as a conqueror, but as a liberator. You and the other priests welcome him into the temple. Unlike Cambyses, the memory of whose alleged sacrilege still lingers, Alexander performs all the correct rituals. He makes a grand sacrifice to the sacred Apis bull, a brilliant move of political theater that shows his respect for Egypt's most sacred traditions. In return, the priests of Ptah, in a ceremony of immense symbolic importance, crown him with the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt. Alexander the Great, the Macedonian king, is now officially Pharaoh Alexander. This is a mainstream historical fact. Alexander was formally recognized as Pharaoh, and in doing so, he presented himself as the legitimate successor to the ancient line of Egyptian kings, not as a foreign overlord. For the Egyptians, this was a crucial distinction. He wasn't just another Persian satrap. He was their king, chosen by their gods. Having secured the heartland, Alexander does something that will change the course of history. He travels to the northwestern coast of the Delta, a spot with a fine natural harbor, protected from the Silta Nile floods by a limestone ridge and with access to fresh water from a nearby lake. Here, on a narrow strip of land between the Mediterranean Sea and Lake Mareotis, he orders the foundation of a new city. He lays out the basic grid plan himself, marking the locations for the central marketplace, the temples, and the city walls. He will name it, with his characteristic lack of modesty, Alexandria. This city is not designed to be an Egyptian capital in the traditional sense, like Memphis or Thebes. It is designed to be a Greek polis, a hub for trade, culture, and military power, looking outward to the Mediterranean world. It is a hinge, connecting his new Egyptian province to his growing empire and to the wider Greek-speaking world. He envisions a cosmopolitan metropolis, a beacon of Hellenistic civilization on African soil. It's a vision that will be realized beyond his wildest dreams. But Alexander has one more journey to make in Egypt, one that is perhaps the most mysterious and significant of his entire life. He undertakes a long and dangerous trek across the western desert to visit the remote oracle of the god Ammon at the Siwa oasis. This is the same oracle that the lost army of Cambyses had supposedly tried to reach. Ammon was a Libyan desert god who the Greeks had identified with their own king of the gods, Zeus. So, in visiting the oracle, Alexander was seeking the blessing of Zeus Ammon. The journey itself is legendary. The historian Callisthenes, Alexander's official court historian, describes how the army got lost in the desert and ran out of water, only to be saved by a miraculous rainstorm. Then, they were supposedly guided the rest of the way by two talking snakes or crows. The accounts differ. This is the quirky, mythologized part of the story, designed to show that Alexander was under divine protection. When he finally arrives at Siwa, he goes into the inner sanctum of the temple to consult the high priest alone. No one knows for sure what was said, but when Alexander emerges, he appears serene and satisfied. According to the stories, the priest had greeted him not as the son of his human father, Philip II of Macedon, but as the son of Zeus Ammon. Historians still debate the significance of this event. Did Alexander truly believe he was divine? Or was this a calculated political move? By being declared the son of a god, his position became unassailable. As pharaoh, he was already considered a living god by the Egyptians. Now he had a divine parentage that would resonate with his Greek and Macedonian followers as well. It was a masterstroke of propaganda that blended Egyptian, Greek, and even broader Near Eastern ideas of divine kingship. It cemented his legitimacy and elevated him to a status beyond that of a mere mortal king. After his visit to Siwa, Alexander doesn't linger in Egypt. Like Pi before him, he has other priorities. He appoints administrators to govern the country, a mix of Macedonians, Greeks, and even some Egyptians, collects a hefty tax, and then marches his army out of Egypt to hunt down Darius III and complete his conquest of Persia. He has spent less than a year in the country, but his actions there have set in motion a chain of events that will define Egypt for the next 300 years. He has liberated it from one foreign empire only to incorporate it into another, a new Hellenistic one, and in the city of Alexandria, He has planted a seed that will grow into the intellectual and cultural capital of the entire Mediterranean world. The age of the native pharaohs is over for good. The age of the Greek pharaohs is about to begin. Alexander the Great never returned to Egypt. His meteoric career ended in Babylon, where he died of a fever at the age of just 32. His vast, newly conquered empire left without a designated heir. His final words, according to tradition, were that the empire should go to the strongest. This was less a succession plan and more an open invitation to a royal rumble. His top generals, a group of ambitious and ruthless Macedonians known as the Diadochi, or successors, immediately began to carve up the empire for themselves in a series of brutal wars that lasted for decades. You are a Macedonian officer, a veteran of Alexander's campaigns, now stationed in Memphis. The man in charge of Egypt is a general named Ptolemy, son of Lagus. Ptolemy was one of Alexander's oldest and most trusted friends, a canny, intelligent, and cautious commander. While the other successors like Antigonus, One-Eye, and Seleucus were battling for control of the vast heartlands of the empire in Asia and Greece, Ptolemy made a beeline for Egypt. He understood that Egypt was the richest, most defensible, and most politically stable part of the whole empire. While the others fought for the grand prize, Ptolemy grabbed the crown jewel and held on tight. His first and most brilliant move was a piece of audacious propaganda and sacrilege. Alexander's body, preserved in honey and encased in a golden sarcophagus, was being transported from Babylon back to Macedonia for burial. This funeral procession was a hugely symbolic prize. Whoever controlled the body of the deified Alexander could claim to be his true successor. Ptolemy arranged for the procession to be hijacked. He intercepted the sarcophagus and, instead of taking it to Macedonia, brought it to Egypt. It was a stunning coup. He had literally captured the god and brought him to his new kingdom. Alexander's body was first laid to rest in Memphis, and later moved to a magnificent tomb in his new city of Alexandria. It became the ultimate relic, a pilgrimage site that conferred immense prestige and legitimacy upon Ptolemy and his descendants. This is a mainstream historical fact. The control of Alexander's tomb was a cornerstone of Ptolemaic propaganda. Ptolemy, who would eventually crown himself Pharaoh Ptolemy I Soter, the savior, was a methodical and brilliant state builder. He knew he couldn't rule Egypt like a traditional Macedonian king. He had to create a new kind of system, one that worked for both the new ruling class of Greek and Macedonian soldiers and administrators and the vast native Egyptian population. He established a dual system. For the Egyptians, he presented himself as a legitimate pharaoh. He patronized the Egyptian temples, supported the priesthood, and had his name written in cartouches on monuments built in the traditional Egyptian style. He understood that keeping the powerful and conservative priesthood on his side was key to controlling the country. For his Greek subjects, he was a Hellenistic king, a patron of arts and sciences, and the leader of a Greek-style administration based in the new capital, Alexandria. He created a rigid, centrally controlled bureaucracy to manage the country's immense wealth, particularly its grain production. The Ptolemaic state was, in essence, a ruthlessly efficient machine for extracting the agricultural surplus of the Nile Valley and using that wealth to fund a powerful army, a massive navy, and the cultural projects that would make Alexandria famous. You, as a Macedonian veteran, are rewarded handsomely for your loyalty. Ptolemy grants you a kleros, a plot of farmland somewhere in the fertile Phaeum region. You are now part of a new military settler class. You are expected to be a loyal soldier, ready for duty when called, but in peacetime, you are a landowner. This creates a permanent Greek and Macedonian presence throughout the Egyptian countryside, a new aristocracy loyal to the Ptolemaic regime that are quirky and revealing. Detail about the early Ptolemaic administration is their obsession with paperwork. They took the already ancient and complex Egyptian bureaucracy and turbocharged it with Greek love for systematization. Papyrus was the ancient world's paper, and Egypt had a virtual monopoly on its production. The Ptolemies used it to create a paper trail that would astound a modern government. We have found papyri documenting everything: tax receipts, marriage contracts, court petitions, farm leases, complaints about noisy neighbors, even a zookeeper's angry memo about the poor quality of food being provided for the sacred crocodiles. This mountain of surviving paperwork gives us an incredibly intimate, if fragmented, picture of daily life in Ptolemaic Egypt. Historians still debate the extent to which the Greek and Egyptian cultures truly blended. The official policy was one of separation. There were two legal systems: Greek law for the Greek citizens and Egyptian law for the native Egyptians. Intermarriage was discouraged, at least in the early days. The ruling class spoke Greek, and Greek was the language of government and high culture. But on the ground, a slow process of fusion began to take place. Greeks started to adopt the worship of certain Egyptian gods, particularly Isis, whose cult would later spread all across the Roman Empire. And Egyptians, especially those who wanted to get ahead in the new administration, learned Greek. A new, blended Greco-Egyptian art style began to emerge, particularly in funerary portraits. This cultural interaction was complex and varied from the highly Hellenized Alexandria to the more traditional villages of Upper Egypt. Ptolemy Isotta ruled for nearly 4 decades, establishing a stable and prosperous kingdom that would last for 3 centuries. He was a warrior, a statesman, and also a scholar. In his old age, he even wrote a history of Alexander's campaigns, which, though now lost, was a primary source for many later Roman historians. He outlived all of the other original successors, dying peacefully in his bed. He had successfully transformed himself from a general into a god-king and had founded a dynasty. But the dynasty he founded, the Ptolemaic dynasty, would be a very strange one indeed, characterized by brilliance and decay, incredible wealth and vicious family feuds, all playing out under the hot Egyptian sun, with the political situation stabilized under the firm hand of Ptolemy I and his successor, Ptolemy II Philadelphus. The city of Alexandria blossoms into the undisputed superstar of the Hellenistic world. It's not just a capital city. It is a grand experiment in culture, knowledge, and urban living. Forget the dusty, ancient, inward-looking capitals of Memphis or Thebes. Alexandria is a vibrant, multicultural, coastal metropolis that looks out to the sea. It is the New York, Paris, and Silicon Valley of its day, all rolled into one. You are a young scholar from Athens, drawn to Alexandria by the promise of royal patronage and the chance to study with the greatest minds in the world. As your ship sails into the great harbor, the first thing you see is a structure so vast it seems to defy gravity. The Pharaohs, the lighthouse of Alexandria. Commissioned by Ptolemy I and completed by his son, it is one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, standing over 100 meters tall, the height of a modern 30-story building. It is by far the tallest man-made structure of its time, apart from the Giza pyramids. During the day, a massive polished bronze mirror at its peak reflects the sunlight, creating a beam that can be seen for miles out at sea. At night, a great bonfire burns, its light guiding ships safely into the harbor. It's more than just a navigational aid. It's a colossal statement of power and prestige, a symbol of the city itself, welcoming and dominating the world at the same time. Once you disembark, you find yourself in a city built on a rational, Hellenic grid plan. The streets are wide and paved, crossing at right angles. There are grand colonnaded avenues, theaters, gymnasiums, and temples dedicated to both Greek and Egyptian gods. You hear Greek spoken everywhere, but it's mixed with the sounds of Egyptian, Hebrew, Persian, and a dozen other languages. The city is a magnet for people from all over the known world. Greek administrators, Macedonian soldiers, Egyptian priests, Jewish merchants, and scholars like yourself. Your destination is the heart of the city's intellectual life, the museum, or shrine of the muses. This is not a museum in the modern sense of a place with exhibits. It is the world's first great research university and think tank, lavishly funded by the Ptolemaic kings. Within its walls live over 100 scholars, scientists, poets, and philosophers. They are given free board, lodging, and a generous stipend. Their only job is to think, to research, to write, and to teach. It is an intellectual paradise. Connected to the museum is its most famous institution, the Great Library of Alexandria. The goal of the library, established by Ptolemy I, was breathtakingly ambitious, to collect a copy of every single book in the entire world. Royal agents are dispatched across the Mediterranean to buy or copy any scroll they can find. A famous, if perhaps exaggerated, story claims that any ship docking in Alexandria's harbor was required to surrender any books on board. The books would be taken to the library, copied by scribes, and then the copy, not the original, would be returned to the owner. The library was a knowledge vacuum cleaner, sucking up the literary and scientific heritage of Greece, Egypt, and the Near East. At its peak, it may have held hundreds of thousands of papyrus scrolls, an unimaginable repository of information. Here, in the cool, quiet halls of the library, the world's knowledge is not just stored. It is organized, edited, and expanded. This is a mainstream historical fact. The scholars of Alexandria invented many of the academic disciplines we still use today. The librarian Callimachus created the Pinox, a 120-volume catalog of the library's holdings, the first library catalog in history. The concept of grammar was formalized here. Homer's Iliad and Odyssey were edited into the standard versions we still read. The scientific achievements are even more staggering. You could walk from one lecture to another and witness the birth of modern science. In one room, Euclid is laying down the principles of geometry in his Elements, a textbook so perfect it would be used for the next 2,000 years. In another, the physician Herophilus is conducting the first-ever systematic dissections of human bodies, a practice considered taboo in mainland Greece, accurately describing the nervous system and distinguishing between motor and sensory nerves. A quirky tidbit of Alexandrian science is that Herophilus and his contemporary Erasistratus were accused by some ancient writers of performing vivisections on condemned criminals, a grisly charge that historians still debate. Later, the head librarian, a genius named Eratosthenes, will achieve one of the most remarkable feats of ancient science. Hearing that on the summer solstice, the sun shone directly down a well in the southern city of Syene, modern Aswan, without casting a shadow, he realized he could calculate the circumference of the entire earth. He measured the angle of the shadow cast by a stick in Alexandria on the same day, used some basic Euclidean geometry, and came up with a figure that was remarkably close, within a few percent, of the actual size of our planet, all with a stick, a well, and the power of reason. In another hall, the engineer Ctesibius is experimenting with pneumatics and hydraulics, creating water clocks, a water organ, and even a type of steam engine, though it was treated as a mere curiosity. The level of scientific inquiry was simply unprecedented. Alexandria was a city of the mind, but it was also a city of immense wealth, and the two were connected. The Ptolemies knew that their prestige depended on being seen as the leaders of the Hellenistic world, not just militarily, but culturally. Their patronage of a museum and library was a form of soft power, attracting the best and brightest to their capital. But this golden age of intellectual freedom and discovery was underwritten by a harsh economic reality, the backbreaking labor of the Egyptian peasants, whose surplus grain paid for it all. The glittering city of Alexandria was, in many ways, a beautiful parasite, feeding on the ancient body of Egypt, and its own internal politics within the royal court, were about to become just as parasitic and destructive. The brilliance of Alexandria's intellectual life stands in stark contrast to the increasingly sordid and dysfunctional nature of the royal family that funded it. The Ptolemaic dynasty, which had started so promisingly with the shrewd and stable Ptolemy I, slowly descended into a cycle of intrigue, excess, and bloodshed that would make a modern soap opera look tame. The core of the problem was a very un-Greek, but very traditionally Egyptian, custom that Ptolemy II instituted: sibling marriage. To emulate the pharaohs of old, who sometimes married their sisters to maintain the purity of the royal bloodline, Ptolemy II married his full sister, Arsinoe II. In the Greek world, this was shocking, an abhorrent taboo. But in Egypt, it made a certain kind of political sense. It kept power and, more importantly, wealth concentrated within the immediate royal family. It elevated the queen to a status equal to the king and reinforced the idea of the royal couple as a pair of living gods, set apart from mortal men. Ptolemy II and Arsinoe II were deified together as the Theoi Adelphoi, the sibling gods. While this first sibling marriage was a political success, Arsinoe II was a brilliant and powerful stateswoman in her own right. It set a dangerous precedent. For the next 2 centuries, the Ptolemaic dynasty would be riddled with brother-sister, uncle-niece, and other incestuous unions. This led to a royal family tree that looked less like a tree and more like a tangled vine, and it created a claustrophobic, paranoid court environment where the closest relatives were also the most dangerous rivals. Everyone had a plausible claim to the throne, and the easiest way to secure your own position was often to eliminate your siblings. You are a courtier in the palace at Alexandria. It's a dangerous job. One day you're in favor with the king. The next you might be executed on the whim of his sister wife, who has just staged a coup. The history of the Middle and Late Ptolemaic period is a confusing and bloody litany of kings and queens with the same few names: Ptolemy, Cleopatra, Berenice, Arsinoe, plotting against, murdering, and overthrowing each other. Take the story of Ptolemy for Philopator, father-lover. He came to the throne after his father was likely poisoned. He then, allegedly under the influence of his corrupt ministers, had his mother Berenice II and his brother Meges murdered to secure his position. He spent most of his reign in decadent luxury, neglecting the affairs of state. His successor, Ptolemy V. Epiphanes, came to the throne as a small child after his parents were murdered in a palace coup. He is famous today only because a decree passed during his reign was carved onto a stone slab in 3 languages: hieroglyphic, Demotic Egyptian, and Greek. That slab, the Rosetta Stone, would one day be the key to deciphering ancient Egyptian writing. At the time, however, it was just a standard piece of royal propaganda, issued by the priesthood to show their support for the young king in exchange for tax breaks. This is a mainstream historical fact. The Rosetta Stone was a political document from a period of weakness, not a monument from a golden age. The reign of Ptolemy VIII Euergetes II is a particularly lurid example of the family's dysfunction. He was nicknamed Physcon, or Potbelly, because of his extreme obesity. He ruled jointly for a time with his brother, Ptolemy VI, before driving him out. He then married his brother's wife, who was also their sister, Cleopatra II, and later also married her daughter, who was also his niece, Cleopatra III, without divorcing the mother. This resulted in a vicious civil war between Ptolemy Physcon and his sister wife, Cleopatra II. The streets of Alexandria, the city of learning and culture, became a battleground for their mercenary armies. Physcon was notoriously cruel. One story claims that, to punish his opponents in the city, he had his own son by Cleopatra II, a boy named Memphites, murdered, dismembered, and sent to his mother as a birthday present. This is where we must add a note of caution. Many of these lurid stories come from Greek and Roman writers, who were hostile to the Ptolemies and eager to portray them as decadent, effeminate, and barbaric Oriental despots. It was propaganda, designed to make them look unfit to rule. The quirky and gruesome tidbit about the birthday present is likely an exaggeration or an outright fabrication. However, the core truth remains. The Ptolemaic court was a snake pit of deadly rivalries. Historians still debate the effect of this royal chaos on the country at large. For the Greek elite in Alexandria, it was a source of constant instability. But for the average Egyptian farmer in a village up the Nile, did it matter which Ptolemy was on the throne, as long as the tax collectors weren't too brutal and the irrigation canals were maintained? To some extent, the massive bureaucracy established by Ptolemy kept the country running, regardless of the drama in the palace. However, the constant civil wars were ruinously expensive. They required hiring more and more mercenaries, which meant raising taxes. This, in turn, led to widespread native Egyptian rebellions, particularly in the south. For long periods, Upper Egypt broke away entirely, ruled by its own homegrown pharaohs. The glorious kingdom of the early Ptolemies was bleeding from within, weakened by its own ruling family. This internal weakness and perpetual conflict did not go unnoticed. A new power was rising in the West, a power built on discipline, law, and military might, a power that had a very low tolerance for dysfunctional monarchies on its borders. The Roman Republic had consolidated its control over Italy, defeated its great rival Carthage, and was now beginning to cast its shadow over the wealthy, chaotic kingdoms of the Hellenistic East. The Ptolemies, in their endless family squabbles, increasingly began to look to Rome to act as an arbiter, a powerful outside referee to settle their disputes. They were inviting the eagle into their nest, not realizing that once invited, it would never leave. The arrival of Rome on the Egyptian stage is not a sudden invasion, but a slow, creeping takeover, like a rising tide. At first, Rome is a distant, useful ally. Then it becomes a powerful friend and protector. Then an arbiter, and finally a master. The Ptolemies, in their self-inflicted weakness, actively invite this progression, repeatedly asking the Roman Senate to mediate their endless family feuds and to guarantee their thrones. You are a Roman senator in the 2nd century BC. You receive an embassy from Alexandria. One Ptolemaic sibling has kicked another one out of the palace, and the ousted royal has come to Rome to plead his case, promising the Republic vast sums of money and eternal friendship if you'll help restore him. This becomes a regular occurrence. For the Senate, it's a golden opportunity. Without firing a shot, you can exert immense influence over the wealthiest kingdom in the Mediterranean. You get to play kingmaker, and every time you do, Egypt's political and financial debt to Rome grows deeper. A famous and telling incident occurs in 168 BC. The Seleucid king Antiochus IV Epiphanes, a descendant of another of Alexander's generals, has invaded Egypt and is about to capture Alexandria. The ruling Ptolemaic siblings, in a panic, appeal to Rome for help. The Senate dispatches a single, elderly senator named Gaius Popilius Laenas. He is not accompanied by an army, just a small staff. He confronts King Antiochus outside Alexandria. Antiochus, who knew Popilius from his time as a hostage in Rome, greets him warmly and extends his hand. Popilius ignores the gesture. He hands the king a tablet bearing a decree from the Roman Senate. Withdraw from Egypt immediately. Antiochus says he will need to consult his council. Popilius then does something of legendary audacity. Using his staff, he draws a circle in the sand around the king. Before you step out of this circle, Popilius says, give me a reply to lay before the Senate. This is the origin of the phrase, a line in the sand. The message is brutally clear. Defy Rome, and you are at war with the Republic. Antiochus is stunned. He knows his army is no match for the Roman legions. After a moment of humiliating silence, he agrees to withdraw. A single Roman senator, backed only by the reputation of Roman power, has saved Egypt. This is a mainstream historical fact that perfectly illustrates the new power dynamic. Rome is the superpower. The Hellenistic kingdoms, including Egypt, are now just client states. As the decades pass, Rome's involvement becomes more direct and more financial. The later Ptolemies are often profligate spenders who need huge loans to finance their civil wars and lavish lifestyles. Where do they get the money? From Roman bankers and powerful Roman politicians who are happy to lend at exorbitant rates of interest. The entire kingdom of Egypt becomes mortgaged to Roman creditors. A king like Ptolemy XII, nicknamed Elites or the flute player for his artistic pretensions and decadent lifestyle, spent a fortune in bribes just to get the Roman Senate to officially recognize him as king and as a friend and ally of the Roman people. He was the father of a rather famous daughter, Cleopatra VII, and he would leave her a kingdom that was effectively bankrupt and politically beholden to Rome. A quirky detail from this period is the rise of a new kind of tourism. Wealthy Romans, fascinated by Egypt's immense antiquity, begin to visit the country. They sail up the Nile to see the pyramids at Giza and the temples of Thebes. They carve their names on the ancient monuments, a practice we would call vandalism, but which they saw as a way of recording their presence at these famous sites. One of the most popular tourist attractions was the Colossi of Memnon, two massive statues of the pharaoh Amenhotep III in Thebes. The northern statue had been damaged in an earthquake in 27 BCE and, as a result, would often emit a strange singing or whistling sound at dawn, likely caused by dew evaporating from the cracked stone. The Romans believed this was the statue of the mythical hero Memnon, greeting his mother, Eos, the goddess of the dawn. They flocked to hear it, and inscriptions left by Roman governors and even the Emperor Hadrian commemorate their visits. The ancient, sacred heart of Egypt was becoming a theme park for its new masters. Historians still debate whether an earlier, more decisive Roman takeover would have been better for Egypt. By propping up the dysfunctional Ptolemaic dynasty for so long, did Rome inadvertently prolong the country's decline and internal strife? Or was this policy of indirect rule simply a pragmatic way for the Republic, which was already overstretched, to control a valuable asset without the massive cost and commitment of a full-scale occupation? The Senate was traditionally reluctant to acquire new provinces, especially one as wealthy and potentially powerful as Egypt. They feared that any Roman general who conquered Egypt would have access to its immense wealth, allowing him to raise a private army and march on Rome itself, a fear that would prove to be remarkably prescient. So, for now, they are content to let the Ptolemies rule, or rather misrule in name. But the situation is becoming unsustainable. The Roman Republic itself is in its death throes, racked by its own civil wars. Powerful, ambitious Roman generals like Pompey the Great, Julius Caesar, and Mark Antony are now the real power brokers in the Mediterranean. They treat the Ptolemaic kingdom less like a client state and more like their personal piggy bank. The fate of Egypt no longer depends on the schemes of the Ptolemaic siblings in the Palace of Alexandria. It depends on the outcome of the bloody power struggles between these titanic Roman figures. The eagle is no longer just circling. It's ready to land and claim its prize. And the last queen of Egypt will have to use every ounce of her cunning, intellect, and charm to try and manage the landing. Into this world of chaos, debt, and Roman domination steps the last and most famous of the Ptolemaic rulers, Cleopatra VII. Forget the Hollywood image of a sultry seductress, draped on a chaise lounge, feeding herself grapes. The real Cleopatra was a formidable intellectual, a ruthless politician, and a brilliant strategist too. Played the high-stakes game of geopolitics with more skill than any of her male relatives had for a century. She was the first Ptolemaic ruler in 300 years who bothered to learn the Egyptian language, a fact that endeared her to her native subjects. She also spoke a half-dozen other languages, was well-read in philosophy and science, and possessed a charisma that was reportedly irresistible. You are a Roman soldier in the legions of Julius Caesar. In 48 BCE, you land in Alexandria not as an invader, but in pursuit of your great rival, Pompey the Great, whom you have just defeated in a decisive battle in Greece. The political situation you find in Egypt is a mess. The young king, Ptolemy XIII, and his sister wife, Cleopatra, are in the middle of their own civil war. Ptolemy XII's courtiers, in a monumentally stupid attempt to curry favor with you, have had Pompey assassinated the moment he stepped ashore, and they present you with his severed head. You, as Caesar, are disgusted. Pompey was your rival, but he was also a great Roman and your former son-in-law. This act of barbarism gives you the perfect pretext to intervene. You set up your headquarters in the royal palace in Alexandria and declare that you, as the representative of the Roman people, will settle the dispute between Ptolemy and Cleopatra. At this point, Cleopatra is in exile, having been driven out of the city by her brother's faction. She needs to get to you, but her brother's forces control the harbor and the approaches to the palace. This leads to one of the most famous stories about her, a tale of daring and ingenuity. A quirky, though likely embellished, tidbit passed down by the historian Plutarch claims that Cleopatra had herself rolled up inside a carpet or a laundry bag, accounts vary, and smuggled into the palace by a loyal servant. The package was delivered to Caesar's private chambers. When it was unrolled, out popped the 21-year-old queen. Imagine the scene. Caesar, a 52-year-old, battle-hardened, and famously pragmatic general, is suddenly face-to-face with this bold, intelligent, and captivating young woman. It's a brilliant theatrical move. She has bypassed all his guards and all her enemies to get a private audience. They talk through the night. He is impressed not just by her beauty, but by her intellect and her audacity. By morning, he has decided to back her claim to the throne, and in the process, they become lovers. This decision sparks the Alexandrian War. Ptolemy XII's army, enraged that Caesar is siding with Cleopatra, besieges him in the palace complex. The fighting is fierce and desperate. At one point, part of the great library is accidentally burned, a tragic loss of knowledge, though probably not a total destruction, as is sometimes claimed. Caesar, outnumbered, holds out until Roman reinforcements arrive. Ptolemy XIII is defeated and ends up drowning in the Nile, weighed down by his own golden armor while trying to flee. Caesar has won. He restores Cleopatra to the throne, but not alone. He makes her co-rule with her even younger brother, Ptolemy XIV, whom she later has assassinated once he's no longer useful. Cleopatra doesn't play nice. A mainstream historical fact is that Caesar and Cleopatra's relationship was both personal and political. For Caesar, it secured him control of Egypt's immense wealth, which he desperately needed to pay his legions and consolidate his power in Rome. For Cleopatra, it gave her the backing of the most powerful man in the world, securing her throne against all rivals. She gives birth to his son, whom she names Ptolemy Caesar, but calls by the nickname Caesarion, or Little Caesar. This child is her ultimate political weapon. He is the potential heir to both the legacy of the Pharaohs and the power of Rome. She even travels to Rome and lives in one of Caesar's villas, causing a huge scandal in the conservative Roman society. The Romans are deeply suspicious of this powerful, intelligent foreign queen and her influence over their great leader. Historians still debate Caesar's ultimate plans. Was he planning to move the capital of his new empire from Rome to Alexandria? Did he intend to make Caesarion his heir, founding a new Romano-Egyptian dynasty? We will never know. In 44 BCE, Julius Caesar was assassinated on the floor of the Roman Senate by a group of conspirators who feared he was about to declare himself king. Cleopatra's world is thrown into chaos once again. Her Roman protector is dead. She flees back to Egypt, her plans in ruins. Rome descends into another brutal civil war, this time between Caesar's assassins and his avengers, led by his loyal general Mark Antony and his shrewd, adopted son Octavian. Cleopatra, ever the pragmatist, waits to see who will emerge victorious. The winner, she knows, will be the new master of the Roman world, and she will have to find a way to charm him, just as she had charmed Caesar. The fate of her kingdom, and the entire 3,000-year-old legacy of pharaonic Egypt, now hangs on her ability to navigate the deadly currents of Roman politics one more time. After the defeat of Caesar's assassins at the Battle of Philippi, the Roman world is carved up between the two victors. The cool, calculating Octavian takes control of the West, including Italy. The East, with its fabulous wealth and ancient kingdoms, goes to the charismatic, hard-living, and brilliant general Mark Antony. And the wealthiest part of the East, the prize jewel, is Egypt. Antony needs Egypt's money to pay his legions and to finance his planned grand invasion of the Parthian Empire, Rome's great rival in the Far East. To get that money, he needs to deal with its queen. In 41 BCE, Antony summons Cleopatra to meet him in the city of Tarsus in modern-day Turkey. He wants to question her about her ambiguous role in the recent civil war and, more importantly, to secure her financial backing. Cleopatra, now 28 years old, knows this is a command performance she cannot refuse. But instead of arriving as a supplicant, a minor client queen coming to beg for favor from her Roman overlord, she stages a spectacular entrance that is one of the masterpieces of political theater in all of history. You are a citizen of Tarsus, crowding the banks of the river Cydnus to see the famous queen arrive. But she doesn't just sail into port. She comes up the river on a magnificent barge with a golden stern and purple sails. The oars that propel it are made of silver, beating time to the music of flutes, pipes, and harps. Cleopatra herself is reclining under a gilded canopy, dressed in the robes of the goddess Venus, or Aphrodite, in Greek. Her attendants are dressed as nymphs and graces, fanning her and burning fragrant incense that drifts over the crowds on the riverbanks. The whole city turns out to watch, leaving Antony sitting alone in the marketplace, where he had planned to receive her. She has upstaged him completely. Instead of him summoning her, she invites him to a lavish banquet on her barge. Antony, a man who appreciated grand gestures and beautiful women, is utterly captivated. Just as with Caesar, their meeting is the start of a legendary love affair, but it is also a deeply serious political alliance. For Antony, Cleopatra provides the money, grain, and naval resources he needs to be the master of the East. For Cleopatra, Antony is her new Roman protector, the shield she needs to maintain her kingdom's independence, and, she hopes, to expand its power. She dreams of a new kind of Hellenistic empire, a partnership between Rome and Egypt, ruled jointly by Antony, herself, and their children. Antony spends the winter of 41 to 40 BCE with her in Alexandria. They live a life of legendary decadence, forming a society of inimitable livers, dedicated to feasting and pleasure. But it's not all fun and games. They are cementing their alliance and planning their future. Cleopatra gives birth to twins, a boy and a girl, whom they name Alexander Helios, the sun, and Cleopatra Selene, the moon. Later, she will have a third child with him, Ptolemy Philadelphus. The names are deliberately chosen. They are the names of great Hellenistic conquerors and gods, signaling their vast ambitions. This alliance causes outrage back in Rome. Octavian, a master of propaganda, seizes on the relationship to portray Antony as a man who has lost his Roman virtue. He claims Antony has been bewitched by a foreign sorceress, that he has gone native, abandoning his duties and his Roman wife, who happened to be Octavian's own sister, Octavia, for a decadent Oriental queen. A quirky but powerful piece of this propaganda was the Roman obsession with beer versus wine. Romans drank wine. It was the drink of civilization. Egyptians drank beer. Octavian spin doctors portrayed Antony as having descended into a barbaric, beer-swilling lifestyle, a sign of his moral decay. The final break comes with an event known as the Donations of Alexandria in 34 BC. After a moderately successful military campaign in Armenia, Antony stages a massive triumphal parade in Alexandria, not Rome. At a ceremony in the city gymnasium, Antony and Cleopatra sit on golden thrones. He declares Caesar Ion to be the true son and heir of Julius Caesar, a direct challenge to Octavian, who was Caesar's adopted son and heir. He then divides up the entire eastern part of the Roman sphere of influence among Cleopatra and their children, naming them as kings and queens of places like Armenia, Syria, and Cyrenaica, territories that Antony didn't even fully control. This is a mainstream historical fact. The donations were seen in Rome as an outrageous giveaway of Roman territory to a foreign family. For the Senate, this was the last straw. Antony was behaving not like a Roman general, but like a Hellenistic king, with Cleopatra as his queen. Octavian convinces the Senate to declare war, not on Antony, which would have sparked another Roman civil war, but on Cleopatra. It's a clever legal distinction that paints Antony as a traitor, fighting on the side of a foreign enemy against his own country. The final, inevitable confrontation comes in 31 BCE, a massive naval battle off the coast of Greece, near a place called Actium. The Battle of Actium is one of history's decisive turning points. Antony and Cleopatra's fleet is large, but their ships are heavy and undermanned. Octavian's fleet, commanded by his brilliant general Marcus Agrippa, is smaller, with lighter, more agile vessels. The battle hangs in the balance for hours. Then, for reasons historians still debate, Cleopatra's squadron of 60 ships raises its sails and breaks out of the battle line, fleeing the scene. Was it a pre-planned escape? Was she panicking? Or was she trying to lure a portion of Octavian's fleet away? We'll never know. But when Antony sees her ship sailing away, he abandons his flagship, boards a smaller, faster vessel, and follows her, leaving his army and the bulk of his fleet to their fate. His forces, leaderless and demoralized, surrender. It is a catastrophic defeat. The lovers flee back to Alexandria, their dreams shattered. Octavian pursues them, invading Egypt the following year. As Octavian's legions close in on the city, Antony, receiving a false report that Cleopatra is already dead, commits suicide by falling on his sword. He is brought, dying, to Cleopatra's mausoleum, where she has barricaded herself, and dies in her arms. A few days later, Octavian takes the city. He meets with Cleopatra, who tries one last time to negotiate, to save her kingdom for her children. But Octavian is not Caesar or Antony. He is cold, implacable, and immune to her charms. He intends to take her back to Rome to be paraded in chains in his victory triumph, the ultimate humiliation. Cleopatra, determined to rob him of this final victory, famously commits suicide. The traditional story, immortalized by Plutarch and Shakespeare, says she had an ASP, a venomous snake, smuggled to her in a basket of figs. She died, a queen to the very end. Octavian has her son Caesar Ion hunted down and killed, reputedly saying, "It is not good to have too many Caesars." With their deaths, the Ptolemaic dynasty ends. The 3,000-year-old story of Pharaonic Egypt is over, with Cleopatra dead and her children either executed or taken to Rome. The kingdom of Egypt ceases to exist as an independent entity. It doesn't become a regular Roman province, governed by the Senate like Sicily or Gaul. Octavian, who will soon be granted the title Augustus and become the first Roman emperor, turns Egypt into his own personal property. It is, by far, the richest prize of the civil wars, and he has no intention of sharing it or allowing any ambitious senator to use it as a power base against him, just as he had feared Antony would. Egypt becomes the private estate of the emperor. You are an Egyptian priest in a temple in a small town up the Nile, far from the drama of Alexandria. The news of the queen's death and the Roman takeover arrives, but on the surface, your life doesn't change dramatically at first. The new Roman governor, or prefect, is a man appointed directly by the emperor. His primary job is the same as the Ptolemy's job: ensure the grain gets harvested and shipped to Rome. The grain of Egypt is now the annona, the free grain dole that feeds the massive population of the capital city. Keeping the Roman mob fed and happy is crucial to the emperor's power. As the saying goes, he who controls Egypt controls Rome. The emperors continue the old tradition of presenting themselves as pharaohs to the Egyptian people. If you look at the temple walls built during the Roman period at places like Dendera or Esna, you see Augustus, Tiberius, Claudius, and even later emperors like Nero and Trajan, depicted in full pharaonic regalia. They are shown making offerings to Isis, Horus, and Osiris, their names written in hieroglyphs inside a royal cartouche. It's a continuation of the same strategy used by the Persians, Alexander, and the Ptolemies, but it's a fiction that wears increasingly thin. Unlike the Ptolemies, who at least lived in Alexandria, the Roman emperors rarely visit. They are distant, abstract figures. The vibrant, living connection between the king and the gods, the very heart of the concept of Ma'at, is now just a hollow, political expediency. For the first couple of centuries, Roman rule brings a kind of stability and prosperity. The civil wars are over. The borders are secure. The Roman genius for engineering means the irrigation systems are well maintained. Trade flourishes, but it's an extractive prosperity. The wealth of Egypt is systematically siphoned off to serve the needs of the wider empire. Slowly, but inexorably, a new religion begins to spread through this Roman Egypt. It's a faith that started in the neighboring province of Judea, centered on a figure named Jesus of Nazareth. Christianity first takes root in the large Jewish community of Alexandria and then begins to spread among the Greek-speaking population and, eventually, the native Egyptians. It offers a message of salvation, of personal connection to a single, all-powerful God, and of hope for a better life in the hereafter, which resonates deeply with people living under foreign occupation. It also offers a strong sense of community in a world where the old social structures are decaying. A quirky detail from this period of religious transition is the rise of Christian monasticism. The very concept of a monk, a holy man who withdraws from the world to live a life of solitary prayer and asceticism, was born in the deserts of Egypt in the 3rd and 4th century CE. Figures like Saint Anthony the Great, who gave away his wealth and went to live alone in the desert, became spiritual superstars, attracting thousands of followers who sought to emulate them. These desert fathers, as they came to be known, were seen as the new spiritual heroes, their struggles against temptation and demons in the wilderness replacing the old myths of gods and pharaohs. The Egyptian desert, once a place of chaos and danger in the old religion, was transformed into a sacred landscape, the heartland of this new, ascetic form of Christianity. As Christianity grows, it comes into direct conflict with the old pagan religions. At first, the Roman authorities persecute the Christians, seeing their refusal to sacrifice to the Roman gods and the deified emperor as an act of treason. But the new faith thrives on martyrdom. By the early 4th century, the Emperor Constantine converts to Christianity, and it becomes the favored religion of the empire. This is the death knell for the ancient Egyptian temples. What follows is a period of often violent religious strife. Militant Christian monks and zealous bishops lead mobs to attack and desecrate the pagan temples, which they see as dens of demonic idols. Statues are smashed, reliefs are defaced, and temples are either abandoned, torn down for their stone, or converted into churches. This is a mainstream historical fact. The end of the ancient Egyptian religion was not a peaceful fading away, but often a violent suppression. The last known hieroglyphic inscription was carved on a wall at the Temple of Isis at Philae, an island near the southern border, in the year 394 CE. The last Demotic graffiti dates to 452 CE, from the same site. After that, the knowledge of how to read the ancient scripts, a skill preserved for millennia by the priestly class, is lost. The temples, once bustling centers of economic, political, and spiritual life, fall silent. The doors are closed forever. The gods of Egypt are abandoned. The great stone sanctuaries are left to the wind and encroaching sand. The civilization that had lasted for more than 3 millennia, that had survived invasions by the Hyksos, the Sea Peoples, the Assyrians, the Persians, and the Greeks, finally succumbs not to an army, but to a new idea. Egypt becomes a Christian country, its pharaonic past forgotten, its sacred writing unreadable, its story lost in a fog of myth and legend for the next 1,400 years, for almost 1,400 years. The story of Egypt is a story of silence. The great civilization becomes a landscape of incomprehensible ruins. You are now a French soldier, part of Napoleon Bonaparte's expedition in 1798. You are marching under a sun more relentless than any you have ever known. Your blue wool uniform an instrument of torture in this heat. You are here for reasons of grand strategy, to strike at British interests and open a path to India. But Napoleon, a man of immense ego and genuine intellectual curiosity, has brought more than just soldiers. He has brought an army of savants, scientists, engineers, artists, and historians to catalog, measure, and understand this ancient land. You and your comrades stare in bewilderment at the ruins of Karnak or Luxor. The scale is inhuman. You are a child of the Enlightenment, a believer in reason and human progress, but these structures feel like the work of giants or gods. The walls are covered in a dense tapestry of carvings, strange, elegant pictures of bird-headed men, seated kings, and enigmatic symbols. It's a language that no one on Earth can read. It's like finding a supercomputer from an alien civilization. You can admire its complexity, but you have no idea what it does or what it means. The local Egyptians can't tell you. Their own connection to this past has been severed for over 1,000 years. To them, the ruins are the work of genies or ancient magicians. In July of 1799, in the port town of Rosetta on the Mediterranean coast, a group of your fellow soldiers, under an officer named Pierre-François Bouchard, are working to reinforce the defenses of an old Mamluk fort. It's hot, dirty manual labor. As they tear down a wall, they find it, a broken slab of dark, granitic stone. It's not particularly large, about the size of a coffee table, and it's covered in writing. This in itself isn't unusual, but what makes an officer stop and take a closer look is that the writing is in 3 distinct bands. The top portion is the familiar, pictorial hieroglyphics. The middle section is a cursive, flowing script they don't recognize, which turns out to be Demotic, the everyday administrative script of late ancient Egypt. And the bottom section is in a language they all know, ancient Greek. This is the Rosetta Stone. It is the key. The savants immediately understand its monumental importance. Assuming the 3 texts say the same thing, the known Greek could be used to unlock the unknown Egyptian scripts. It's the ultimate cryptographic puzzle. The stone is celebrated as a great prize of the expedition. A quirky tidbit is what happened to it next. When the French were defeated by the British in Egypt in 1801, the stone was surrendered under the terms of the treaty. It has resided in the British Museum ever since, much to the perennial annoyance of the French and the Egyptians. If you're ever in a museum and see 2 countries arguing over who owns a rock, it's probably this one. The race to decipher the hieroglyphs consumes scholars across Europe. But the man who cracks the code is a brilliant, obsessive young Frenchman named Jean-François Champollion. He devotes his entire life to the puzzle. He realizes that the hieroglyphic system is not just simple picture writing, nor is it a purely alphabetic system. It's a complex and beautiful mix of alphabetic signs, syllabic signs, and determinatives, signs that indicate the category of a word. A mainstream historical fact is his great breakthrough in 1822. Using the cartouches, the oval rings, which he correctly guessed contained royal names, he was able to sound out the name Ptolemy from the Rosetta Stone and Cleopatra from another monument. Comparing the common sounds, he built up a rudimentary alphabet. Then, he got his hands on copies of inscriptions from Abu Simbel and read the cartouche of a much earlier pharaoh, Ramesses, Ramesses, Ramses. He knew he had done it. He had cracked the code. Legend has it he ran to his brother's office, shouted, "Détens l'affaire! I've got it!" and promptly fainted, remaining unconscious for 5 days. Historians still argue about the true legacy of Napoleon's expedition. Was it a brutal colonial invasion disguised by a mission of intellectual enlightenment? Or was it the catalyst that, however violently, woke Egypt's ancient history from its long slumber and gave it back to the world? The result, in any case, was an explosion of interest. The multi-volume Description de l'Égypte, the monumental publication by Napoleon's savants filled with breathtakingly precise drawings of the monuments, created a sensation in Europe. It kicked off the phenomenon of Egyptomania. With Champollion's decipherment, the silent civilization began to speak again. The temple walls were no longer just mysterious pictures. They were historical documents, poems, and religious texts. The history of Egypt could be written for the first time from its own records. Archaeologists, adventurers, and treasure hunters flocked to the Nile. The great tombs were opened, the museums of Europe filled with mummies and statues, and the story you have been listening to tonight, the story of its great kings, its collapse, and its complicated, multicultural twilight, could finally be pieced together. Ancient Egypt, the living civilization, had died when the temples closed. But its ghost, its immortal dream, was reborn, rising from the sand to capture the imagination of the entire world, a story that continues to fascinate us, even now, as you lie here, listening, on the edge of sleep. And so, the grand and tumultuous story of Egypt's final days, and its unlikely rebirth as a dream in our collective mind, now draws to a quiet close. The echoes of marching armies, of frantic whispers in palace hallways, and of the scholar's triumphant cry, all begin to soften and fade away. The intense heat of the desert sun captured in our imagination can now give way to the gentle coolness of your own quiet space, and the brilliant gold of a pharaoh's mask can dissolve into the soft darkness behind your eyes. Let the weight of those millennia settle, not as a burden, but as a fine layer of dust, like the sand that protected the silent temples for so long. There are no more empires to fall, no more battles to witness tonight. The long journey down the Nile has reached its end, and the waters ahead are calm and still, ready to carry you into your own tranquil currents of sleep. All that is left now is the soft rhythm of your own breathing, a steady and peaceful cadence in the quiet of your room. Let the last remnants of the story drift away like incense smoke, leaving only a sense of peace and a deep, well-earned restfulness. Let the echoes fade. Let the dreams come. After thousands of years of unparalleled glory, did ancient Egypt truly fall into oblivion? Or was its end a profound transformation rather than a final collapse? In this concluding part, we confront the ultimate question. How did immortal Egypt, a civilization seemingly destined to last forever, finally meet its fate? We delve beyond the simplistic notions of invasion, exploring the complex interplay of internal decay, political fragmentation, and changing global dynamics that led to its ultimate decline. Discover the shocking truth about the final dynasties, the relentless pressures that eroded its power, and the unexpected ways its incredible legacy endured long after its independence waned. Was it a dramatic end, or a slow, agonizing fade? This video reveals the profound and often overlooked aspects of Egypt's final era, showing how its spirit, culture, and influence remained remarkably immortal. What do you believe was the ultimate fate of ancient Egypt's immortality? Share your insights on this monumental historical paradox in the comments below.